are signals moving through the air every night that no one ever sees. They pass through bedroom walls, through damp brick terraces, through the black windows of office towers after the cleaners have gone home. They cross railway arches and council estates, motorway flyovers and silent retail parks. They move invisibly over Leeds while most of the city sleeps, carrying football highlights, weather bulletins, late-night adverts for stairlifts, old documentaries about forgotten wars, and the soft electronic hiss that fills the gaps between one image and the next. Most people believe television is something that arrives whole. A program begins, a presenter speaks, a picture fills the screen. Then, for a fraction of a second, the signal stutters, the image breaks, and a thin veil of static flickers across the glass. The viewer blinks. The program continues, and whatever passed through that flicker is gone. At least, that is what people are meant to believe. In the early hours of a wet Thursday morning in November, Marcus Thorne was the only person in the Northeast Regional Broadcast Compliance Centre who noticed that one of those flickers had a shape. The centre stood on the edge of an industrial estate outside Leeds, a low concrete building with narrow windows, steel fencing and security lights that turned the rain silver. During the day, it looked forgettable, just another utility structure among delivery depots, storage units and distribution warehouses. At night, it looked almost abandoned, except for the red warning beacons blinking slowly on the transmission mast behind it. Inside, the building never truly slept. Monitors glowed in stacked rows. Server cabinets breathed warm air into the corridors. Emergency lights hummed. Clocks in 3 different rooms counted seconds with the exact indifference of machines built to outlast people. In Control Suite 3, where regional feeds were checked, logged and archived, Marcus sat alone beneath the low ceiling and watched 24 screens at once. He was 38 years old, pale from night work, narrow-shouldered, with dark hair cut shorter than suited him, and a face that often seemed more tired than expressive. His job title sounded dull by design: Broadcast Compliance Monitor. It meant he was responsible for ensuring that scheduled transmissions matched logs, that advertising breaks fell within regulation, that emergency alert systems remained intact, and that no unauthorized content entered the feed. Most nights, the work demanded patience rather than brilliance. Marcus watched for errors other people missed because they had trained themselves not to look too closely. A subtitle delay, a timecode drift, a local station ID appearing 3 frames early, a sponsor graphic remaining on screen half a second too long. He liked the precision of it. Precision had helped him rebuild a life that 5 years earlier had begun to narrow around rituals he could not explain to anyone without sounding broken. Checking locks, rechecking locks, counting steps between doorways, aligning mugs by handle angle, washing his hands until the skin split at the knuckles. He had learned slowly and with professional help that order could be useful only when it served living, not when it replaced it. The night shift suited him because it gave him a controlled world. There were procedures, logs, timestamps, fault codes. If something happened, it could be written down. If it could be written down, it could be contained. That was what Marcus believed until 02/17/43. The program airing on the regional late-night slot was an old documentary about post-war municipal engineering. It had been licensed cheaply, scheduled because almost no one watched at that hour, and played from the automated archive with the quiet inevitability of forgotten content. The image showed a black and white shot of workmen lowering brick into a trench somewhere in Yorkshire, their caps darkened by rain, their faces turned away from the camera. Marcus had seen worse transfers. The footage was scratched. The contrast pulsed. The narration had that clipped, official tone common to mid-century public information films. Nothing about it should have held his attention. Then the picture blinked. Not a normal dropout. Not quite. Marcus's eyes moved before his conscious mind did. His right hand paused above the log keyboard. The documentary continued as if nothing had happened, showing a council engineer pointing at a paper plan with a fountain pen. Marcus stared at the screen. A person less accustomed to watching degraded footage might have dismissed the moment as compression noise. Even another compliance monitor might have marked it as archival instability and moved on. But Marcus had spent 13 years learning the difference between randomness and intrusion. Static had habits, faults had signatures. Tape damage bloomed and dragged. Digital interference blocked and smeared. Signal loss tore the image in ways that resembled weather. This had not torn. It had appeared. One frame, maybe less. He rolled his chair closer to the console. The room reflected faintly in the glass walls around him. His white mug, the neat stack of incident forms, the small plastic pill organizer he kept beside the keyboard. Monday to Sunday, each compartment closed. The building's ventilation system clicked somewhere above him. Marcus entered the timestamp and pulled the rolling buffer. The feed appeared on his review monitor. He scrubbed backward 10 seconds, then forward. The workman descended into the trench. The narrator spoke about urban drainage improvements. Rain streaked the old film. Then, at 02:17:43:12, the screen changed. Only for a single frame. Marcus froze it. At first, it looked like visual snow, a dense grey field of speckles, lines, and broken contrast. But the longer he looked, the less random it became. There were darker veins running through it, rectangular voids, thin white intersections, areas of repeated pattern that no broadcast fault should have produced. His pulse lifted. He told himself to remain procedural. He created a local incident marker. He exported the frame. He checked the source file. The documentary master stored in the archive showed no corruption of Disson at that timestamp. The intrusion had not been embedded in the program itself. It had entered somewhere between playback and transmission. Marcus leaned back. The control suite felt suddenly larger and emptier. Beyond the reinforced window, the corridor lights glowed yellow over polished floors. No movement, no voices. The rest of the night staff were 2 floors below. One engineer covering network health, one security guard at reception, and a facilities contractor somewhere near the loading bay. In the compliance suite, there was only the low wash of monitors and the sound of rain ticking against the high windows. Marcus opened the analysis software he used for technical faults and began with ordinary corrections. Contrast expansion, edge detection, noise separation. He expected the shape to collapse into meaningless compression debris. It did not. Instead, the image sharpened. Not clearly at first, it emerged in stages, like something submerged beneath dirty water. Lines became roots. Roots became tunnels. The grey background divided into levels. Fine markings appeared at junctions, too deliberate to be artifacts. There were symbols he did not recognize, small notations placed beside curved passages and service shafts. He adjusted the filter again. A name appeared in faint block lettering near the lower edge. Holbeck Intercept. Marcus stopped breathing for a moment. Holbeck lay only a few miles from the broadcast center, an old industrial district of railway lines, converted warehouses, arches, workshops, and developments built over generations of forgotten infrastructure. He knew the area well enough to know that beneath parts of Leeds ran a hidden history of culverts, drainage routes, sealed basements, and Victorian brickwork that rarely appeared on modern public maps. But the image on his monitor was not a vague historic survey. It was precise, too precise. Marcus zoomed in until the pixels began to separate. There were depth markings, access points, blocked sections marked with diagonal strokes, a maintenance chamber tagged beside what looked like an old sewer line. The lines were not labeled for tourists, historians, or renaissance or city planners. They were labeled like routes beneath the city. He glanced at the wall clock, 02:29. His left hand had begun to tap the desk in sets of 4, a habit he had spent years interrupting. He noticed it and pressed his palm flat against the laminate surface. Once. Hold, release. He breathed in through his nose and counted down from 10. There would be an explanation, a routing test, a rogue calibration frame, a training file accidentally inserted. Some engineer's unfinished work pushed into the wrong buffer. He opened the transmission chain logs. No unauthorized access. He checked the automation events. No manual override. He checked the regional uplink report. Clean. The frame existed in the outgoing archive, but nowhere before it. That meant it had entered the live path at the point where the system was supposed to be most secure. Marcus copied the file to an isolated review folder and gave it a neutral name. Visual fault 021143. He did not write Holbeck. He did not write map. He did not write intrusion. Not yet. The discipline mattered. Words could panic a person before the evidence earned them. Still, when he minimized the analysis window, the ordinary documentary seemed obscene in its calmness. Men in flat caps smiled beside a municipal trench. The narrator praised the city's hidden systems, the pipes and drains that allowed modern life to continue above ground without citizens needing to think about what moved beneath their feet. Marcus watched the old footage with a tightening in his chest. He remembered something his therapist had once told him. Obsession begins when uncertainty feels like danger. But this was not uncertainty. This was a frame that should not exist. At 02:41, Marcus sent a routine technical query to the overnight network engineer, phrased carefully. Possible anomalous frame insertion on regional feed at 02:17:43. Please confirm any maintenance activity or diagnostic overlay on transmission path. The reply came 6 minutes later. No maintenance, no overlay. Path clean. He stared at the words. Then another message appeared, not from the engineer, but from the automated access system. Remote archive request denied. Marcus frowned. He had not requested the remote archive. A second alert followed. User session duplicate detected. For several seconds, he did not move. His reflection looked back at him from the black border of the monitor, eyes fixed and hollow under fluorescent light. Somewhere in the building, a door closed softly. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a careful, controlled sound, far down the corridor where no one was supposed to be working. Marcus turned his head toward the glass wall. The corridor remained empty. On the review monitor behind him, the ghost frame stayed frozen, a hidden map drawn inside a fraction of static, a piece of the city exposed for less time than it took to blink. Then the printer beside the compliance desk woke by itself. It clicked, warmed, and pushed out a single sheet of paper. Marcus stood slowly. The page contained no report header, no timestamp, no station logo, only one line printed in plain black text. Stop looking between frames. Marcus Thorne's life was built around things that stayed where he left them. At 07:06 every morning, when the night shift released him back into the city, he stepped through the staff exit of the broadcast center and paused under the small concrete canopy beside the service road. He did not do it because the view was pleasant. There was no view to speak of. A chain-link fence, a wet car park, the pale backs of warehouses, lorries reversing into loading bays with soft hydraulic sighs. Beyond them, Leeds lifting itself into daylight under a low sky. He paused because transition mattered. Inside the building, Marcus was necessary. He understood signal paths, compliance law, transmission logs, archival timecode, emergency routing, and the thousand quiet things that kept a regional broadcast network from embarrassing itself in public. Outside the building, he was just a man in a dark, waterproof jacket with tired eyes and a cotton tote bag containing a packed lunch container he would wash before sleeping. He always took the same bus from a stop near the estate's entrance. If the rain was heavy, he stood beneath the shelter and watched water gather along the curb. If the bus was late, he did not check the app more than twice. That was one of his rules. 2 checks were practical. 3 was reassurance. 4 was the beginning of trouble. His therapist, Dr. Helen Garside, had helped him draw those lines over several years. Marcus had once believed recovery meant becoming someone who never felt the pull of compulsions again. Helen had been gentle but firm in correcting him. Recovery, she told him, was not the absence of the old machinery. It was learning not to obey it every time it started. So Marcus lived by structures that were visible, reasonable, and limited. Keys in the blue bowl by the door. Shoes aligned once, not corrected again. Kettle filled before shower. Mugs allowed to face whatever direction they landed in the cupboard, unless he was having a bad week. Medication taken after toast. Sleep mask on the bedside table. Phone on airplane mode from 08:14 until 14:30, except on Fridays, when he allowed himself to wake at 13:50 for groceries. His flat was in a modest brick building in Headingley, above a closed travel agency that had become a nail salon, and then, after that failed too, a dark windowed unit with a faded "To Let" sign. The flat had 2 rooms and a narrow kitchen overlooking bins, chimneys, and the rear windows of other people's lives. Students came and went from the houses nearby, laughing at hours that belonged to no one sensible. On match days, the streets filled with noise. In winter, damp gathered in the corners despite the dehumidifier. Marcus did not mind. The flat was small enough to control and ordinary enough to disappear into. On the morning after the ghost frame appeared, he returned home later than usual. The bus had been on time. The traffic had been ordinary. A woman across the aisle had eaten crisps too loudly. A schoolboy had leaned his forehead against the glass and watched the city pass as if already exhausted by it. Nothing around Marcus suggested that a single frame of static had opened beneath his working life like a trapdoor. Yet he carried the printout in his bag. He had folded it twice, then unfolded it before leaving the building, then folded it again along the same lines. He knew this was not ideal. He knew the act had the texture of compulsion. But he had also known he could not leave it in the compliance suite. Not after the remote session alert. Not after the printer had produced the message. Stop looking between frames. The words seemed less dramatic in daylight and more disturbing. Threats in films arrived with menace. Threats in real life often arrived looking administratively plain, as if danger had learned office etiquette. Marcus placed the sheet on his kitchen table and stood over it without removing his coat. Rain ticked lightly against the window. The radiator clicked. Somewhere below, a metal shutter rattled as someone unlocked the shop unit. The map itself was not printed on the page. Only the warning. The ghost frame remained on his secure work partition, copied to the isolated folder under a name that revealed nothing. He had not emailed it to himself. He had not placed it on a personal drive. He had not broken that rule. He understood enough about digital trails to know that panic made people careless. Still, he had brought home the warning. He told himself it was evidence. Then he heard Helen's voice in memory. Evidence of what, Marcus? He removed his coat and hung it on the hook by the door. The first instinct was to call someone. Not the police, not yet. That would require an explanation he could not deliver without sounding unstable. A compliance monitor claims late-night television static contains a map of Victorian sewers, and someone at the station warned him to stop looking between frames. Even Marcus could hear how it would land. He considered calling his younger sister Alice. Alice lived in York with her husband and 2 children, and she had become careful around Marcus in the way loving relatives become careful after a person has been ill for a long time. She no longer asked too quickly whether he was taking his medication. She no longer used the word spiral. She had learned to listen without immediately treating every concern as a symptom, but she would hear something in his voice. She always did. So he made tea instead. He put 1 tea bag in the mug, filled the kettle, switched it on, waited, poured, removed the tea bag after exactly 3 minutes because taste, at least, was not a pathology. He sat at the kitchen table and looked at the warning until the tea went from hot to drinkable. The sensible action was to report the printer incident through internal security. The difficult part was that Marcus did not know who had printed it. He had reviewed the immediate print queue before leaving the center. The job had no registered user, no originating workstation, and no device path visible through the ordinary interface. It was not impossible. Legacy systems did strange things when they were badly maintained, but the broadcast center was not a village office with a temperamental copier. Every connected device was logged. Every port was monitored. The building had been renovated 3 years earlier after a failed ransomware attempt against a regional media contractor. Security had become a point of institutional pride. That pride made the blank record more troubling. Marcus slept badly. At 11:22, he woke with the sensation that he had heard the printer again. He sat upright in bed, heart pounding, the room grey with late morning light. No sound followed. The flat was still. Only the small electric clock beside the bed made its faint insect hum. He lay back down and closed his eyes. Behind his eyelids, the static returned. Not as noise, as structure, dark veins, white intersections, Holbeck intercept, the sense of something hidden not because it was lost, but because someone had taken care to make it pass unseen through the world's most familiar surface. By 14:06, he had given up on sleep. He showered, dressed, and sat at his small desk with an old notebook open before him. Marcus preferred paper for personal planning because it did not refresh, notify, update, or remember anything he had not chosen to write. He dated the page. Then he made himself describe only observable events. 02-17-43-12. Anomalous single frame in live outgoing regional feed. Source archive clean. Outgoing archive contains anomaly. Frame analysis suggests structured image, possibly map. Text visible, Holbeck intercept. Network engineer confirmed no maintenance activity. Unauthorized duplicate session alert. Unlogged printer output. Stop looking between frames. He stopped there. He did not add, someone knows. He did not add, someone was in the building. He did not add, this is exactly how it starts again. The notebook page looked calm, and for a few minutes the calmness helped. The facts sat in lines. Lines could be tested. Tested things could be separated from fear. At 15:30, Marcus attended his fortnightly appointment with Dr. Garside at a practice near Chapel Allerton. He almost cancelled, then forced himself not to. Avoidance was another old language his mind still spoke fluently. Helen Garside was in her early 60s, with silver hair cut neatly at the jaw, and the unhurried manner of someone who had spent decades allowing silence to do some of the work. Her office smelled faintly of coffee and old books. A framed print of the Yorkshire Dales hung behind her chair, all muted greens and low cloud. Marcus did not tell her everything. He told her there had been an unusual incident at work. She watched him carefully. Unusual in what way? A signal fault, Marcus said. Did it upset you because it was a fault, or because of what you thought it might mean? That was Helen's skill. She rarely stepped where he expected. Marcus looked at the carpet between them. Both. Have you been able to separate the technical evidence from the anxiety response? I'm trying. Good, trying is the work. He nodded, though he felt a flicker of irritation. Not with her, with the smallness of the room, with the calm clock on her wall, with the impossibility of explaining that this time the pattern might not be inside him. Helen did not dismiss him. She never did, but Marcus could feel the past sitting beside him like a second patient. Every worry he expressed had to pass through the old story of his illness before it reached anyone else as credible information. That was the punishment no one had intended. Once people had seen you lose trust in your own mind, they found it difficult to know when to trust you again. On his way home, Marcus walked instead of taking the bus. The afternoon had darkened early, the city shining under rain. Cars moved along wet roads with their headlights smeared across the tarmac. People hurried beneath umbrellas, past takeaways. Charity shops, estate agents, betting shops, cafes closing their doors. Leeds was not a city that revealed itself easily. Its old surfaces remained tucked between new developments, brick under glass. Tunnels under roads, water under stone. He found himself thinking of Holbeck, not as a district on a map, but as a layer. The visible city and the city beneath it. By evening, he knew he would not wait for the next shift to look again. He logged into the compliance portal from his approved home terminal, using the restricted remote access granted for incident review. He stayed within policy. He opened only the previous night's files. He checked the outgoing archive around the anomaly. Then methodically he widened the search by 30 seconds, then 2 minutes, then 10. Nothing. The frame was alone. At 1948, he checked whether similar faults had been flagged in other late-night broadcasts across the regional network. He expected none. If an anomaly had been noticed, it would have appeared in the compliance reports. But compliance reports depended on someone noticing. Marcus searched for single-frame artifacts, unclassified visual faults, and transmission irregularities marked as non-critical over the last month. 3 results appeared. 1 in Wakefield, 1 in Bradford, 1 in Huddersfield, all between 02 and Dribd, and a 3 across, all during low-audience archive programming, all dismissed as source degradation. Marcus sat back from the desk. The room seemed to lose temperature. He opened the Wakefield clip first. An old cookery program, a woman in a floral blouse lifting a pie from an oven, a flicker at 02:32:09. He isolated the frame, exported it, and ran the same filter sequence he had used at work. For several seconds, the screen remained only static. Then lines emerged. Not Holbeck this time. A different section of underground passagework. Different markings, different notations. At the lower edge, half obscured by noise, was another label. Kirkgate South. Marcus's mouth had gone dry. he opened the Bradford incident, then Huddersfield. By 21:13, 4 ghost frames sat on his screen, each one masquerading as a meaningless transmission fault, each one revealing a different portion of a hidden network beneath West Yorkshire. Whatever this was, it had not happened once. It was being broadcast in pieces. Marcus reached for his notebook, but before his pen touched the page, his phone lit up on the desk. Unknown number. He let it ring. The sound seemed too loud in the small flat. When it stopped, a voicemail notification appeared almost immediately. Marcus waited 10 seconds before playing it. There was no voice at first, only a faint electronic tone, thin and high, buried beneath a bed of static. Then a man whispered, very close to the microphone. You found the second one faster than expected. The voicemail was 17 seconds long. Marcus listened to it once in full, then placed the phone face down on the desk as if the glass itself had become warm. Outside his flat, evening traffic moved through wet streets with the slow friction of tires on rain. A group of students passed below his window, laughing too loudly, their voices rising and fading into the ordinary life of Headingley. The sounds should have helped. They should have reminded him that the world remained broad, careless, and populated by people who had no idea that a stranger had just spoken into his private number about something hidden in broadcast static. Instead, the ordinariness made the message worse. You found the second one faster than expected. Not the first one, the second one. The sentence carried an intimacy Marcus disliked. It implied observation. It implied expectation. It implied that someone, somewhere, had already imagined him sitting exactly where he sat now, replaying what he should not have received. He turned the phone over again and wrote down the details before allowing himself to react. Unknown number, 2114. Duration, 17 seconds. Background, static, high-frequency tone. Spoken phrase. You found the second one faster than expected. Male voice, whispered, possibly altered. He hesitated before writing the next line. Caller aware of investigation. The words looked theatrical on the page. Marcus crossed out investigation and replaced it with review. He could not afford language that made him sound like a man building a conspiracy from sleeplessness and signal noise. A review was what he did professionally. A review had boundaries. He replayed the voicemail through the phone speaker and recorded it on a separate handheld audio device he used for work notes. Then he replayed it again through headphones, lowering the volume until the whisper nearly disappeared and the faint tone underneath became clearer. It was not a clean tone. It pulsed. Very slightly, like something encoded beneath a poor quality transmission. Marcus closed his eyes and counted the pulses. Not because it comforted him, because counting when used properly could be measurement. There were short bursts grouped irregularly, but not randomly. He opened an audio spectrum tool on his terminal and fed the recording through it. The display filled with bands of color and noise, the whisper forming a blurred disturbance around the mid-range. Beneath it, almost too faint to notice, a narrow trace sat just above the ordinary limit of cheap phone compression. It appeared, vanished, appeared again. A handshake. That was the word that came to mind before Marcus was ready to accept it. In broadcast engineering, handshake signals belong to systems confirming recognition, device to device, server to server. One end asking, "Are you there?" The other answering, "Yes, ready." Not human conversation, but machine agreement. He exported the audio image and stared at the spectral line. The tone did not feel like part of the threat. It felt like cargo. He pushed back from the desk and stood. The room swayed slightly, not from dizziness, but from the pressure of too many conclusions arriving at once. He walked into the kitchen, ran cold water over his hands, and held them there until his breathing settled. His old patterns pressed close. Check the door, check the phone settings, search the number. Replay the message until it lost power. Reopen every ghost frame, compare every line. Do not sleep. Do not eat. Do not let uncertainty exist. Marcus gripped the edge of the sink. "No," he said quietly. The word sounded small in the flat, but it was enough to create a line. He would proceed like a compliance monitor, not like a frightened man. He made toast. He ate half of it. He took his medication. He set a timer for 40 minutes and promised himself that until the timer ended, he would do only one thing. establish whether the static frames contained verifiable map data or whether his mind was imposing structure where none existed. The question mattered more than the threat. If the maps were false, then the danger might still be real, but the mystery changed. If the maps were accurate, then someone was using regional television signals to distribute information no ordinary viewer would ever perceive. Marcus began with the first ghost frame, the Holbeck image. He did not have access to classified infrastructure documents, and he knew better than to pretend otherwise. But Leeds had accumulated centuries of public records, planning applications, drainage references, railway surveys, archaeological reports, insurance maps, and scanned council documents scattered across local archives. Much of the city's buried structure was not secret in the dramatic sense. It was simply neglected, dispersed, badly labeled, or buried in PDFs no one had opened since digitization. He opened publicly available historic maps from the late 19th century, then early 20th century drainage plans, then modern street layouts. He did not search for hidden tunnels or anything that would lead him into forums and fantasy. He searched like a technician. Holbeck Culvert, Victorian sewer Leeds alignment, South Accommodation Tunnel, former railway arches utility access. He compared the ghost frame not to one source, but to many partial ones. At first, the results were disappointing. Lines did not match. Scale drifted. The frame was distorted, probably deliberately, with no obvious north marker. He rotated it 3 degrees clockwise, then 5. He stretched the vertical axis by 8%. The shape began to sit more naturally beneath the modern road grid. A curved passage in the ghost frame aligned with an old watercourse route that had been culverted long before most residents were born. A rectangular void corresponded with a known basement footprint under a former textile warehouse. A branching line that Marcus had assumed to be decorative matched almost exactly a drainage feature marked on a municipal plan from 1894 and absent from later public schematics. He stopped the comparison and looked at the clock. The 40-minute timer had expired 23 minutes earlier. He had not heard it. That frightened him more than the map. Marcus stood, turned off the timer, and wrote the overrun in his notebook. He had promised himself that accountability would not disappear just because the problem was real, especially because the problem might be real. Then he returned to the desk. By 23:30, the Holbeck frame had yielded 11 points of correspondence with historic infrastructure records. Not enough for a court. More than enough to rule out accidental noise. He moved to the Kirkgate South frame. This one was cleaner. It had appeared during a Wakefield local feed, but mapped part of central Leeds, not Wakefield. That detail bothered him. The broadcast region mattered less than the content. Whoever sent the frames was not placing them according to audience location in any simple way. They were inserting fragments where signal traffic was quietest and oversight weakest. Marcus matched Kirkgate South against old Market District plans, railway-adjacent service routes, and a set of scanned redevelopment documents from nearly 2 decades earlier. At 0012, he found a junction in the frame that aligned with a sealed pedestrian service corridor mentioned once in a planning objection and nowhere else in the public file. He whispered, "Why send this through television?" The flat gave no answer. The obvious explanation was secrecy. A hidden signal passed through a public system. But that was too broad. There were easier ways to send encrypted data. Dead drops, dark web channels, private radio, compromised phones, a criminal network sophisticated enough to insert frames into a regional broadcast path would not need old documentaries and cookery programs unless the method itself offered something useful. Television signals reached everywhere. Not just homes, shops with recording systems, security offices, care homes, closed pubs with satellite boxes left on overnight, old DVR units in back rooms, engineers monitoring stations, cheap capture devices, automated systems no one checked unless something failed. A single frame could pass unnoticed by people but be captured by machines. That thought brought Marcus back to the voicemail tone. He opened the spectral image again. The pulse groups were faint but regular enough to test. He isolated them, reduced the whisper, and converted the pattern into timing intervals. The result looked meaningless at first, a list of numbers without context. Then he compared the intervals against common device wake signals and synchronization markers. Not exact, but close. Too close. He leaned nearer to the monitor. It was not merely a message sent to him. The voicemail had carried a version of the same embedded structure. It had been designed to trigger or identify something listening. His phone might not have been the intended receiver, or worse, it had been. Marcus unplugged the device from its charger and powered it off. He removed the SIM card with a paperclip and placed both phone and SIM in a biscuit tin lined with kitchen foil. The gesture looked absurd once he finished it, like something done by a man in a film before the audience decides he has crossed into paranoia. He hated that. He hated how easily caution could resemble illness from the outside. At 01:05, he opened the Bradford ghost frame. This one resisted alignment. Its apparent tunnels did not sit beneath any district he expected. The label at the lower edge was badly degraded, more scratches than letters. He enlarged it, cleaned the contrast, and tried to read the text. Two possibilities emerged. Bankside or backside. Neither helped. The frame contained a cluster of rectangles arranged around a larger void, with three narrow access lines converging from different directions. He searched public records for old cellars, bank basements, commercial vaults, and redundant service conduits. The word bank began as a possible label and then became something more literal. The first match came from an old planning file for a former commercial property near the city centre. Marcus found it buried in an appendix, a basement reinforcement survey connected to a banking premises refurbishment in the 1980s. The measurements were incomplete, but the footprint was familiar. He overlaid the ghost frame. The larger void matched the old vault perimeter. Marcus sat very still. A map of abandoned infrastructure was one thing. A map that connected to vault space was another. The ghost frames were not historical curiosities, they were operational. His earlier fear had been too small. This was not someone showing off that they could hide images in static. This was not a prank, not an art project, not a bored engineer's test pattern. These fragments were instructions. They described ways through the parts of the city people trusted precisely because they never saw them. He opened a clean document and began listing correspondences. Frame A, Holbeck Intercept, Underground Passage Network. Possible access route. Frame B, Kirkgate South, Service Corridor and Culvert Alignment. Frame C, Possible vault-adjacent basement footprint. Frame D, Pending. He did not write robbery, not yet. At 01:48, the heating pipes knocked in the wall and made him flinch. He realized his shoulders were aching from the way he had held himself for hours. On the desk, the notebook had filled with careful handwriting that became tighter toward the bottom of each page. This too, he noticed. This too, he marked. He needed an outside check. Not a friend, not family, not police. Someone who could look at the map without first looking at Marcus's history. There was one person at work he trusted enough to ask indirectly. Priya Nair worked days in infrastructure liaison, managing the dull but essential overlap between broadcast sites, utilities contractors, emergency planning teams, and local authorities. She knew more about the physical city beneath transmission assets than most people in the company. She also knew Marcus well enough not to tease him when he became precise. But sending her the frame would leave a trail. Calling her would invite questions. He drafted an email 3 times and deleted it 3 times. Then he wrote something modest. Morning Priya, quick technical curiosity. Do you know of any legitimate reason an old municipal drainage or subterranean service schematic would be present in a broadcast diagnostic frame? No urgency, just trying to rule out a weird artifact. He stared at the message for a full minute, then changed weird to unusual. He scheduled it to send at 08:15, when a normal person might ask a normal work question. Then he tried to sleep. He managed less than 2 hours. At 07:56, before the scheduled email left his outbox, Marcus woke to 3 knocks at the flat door. Not loud, not aggressive, 3 measured knocks. He lay motionless, listening. No voice followed, no delivery driver called up from the stairwell, no footsteps retreated. The knocks came again. Marcus rose, moving quietly across the cold floor. Through the peephole, he saw no one. Only the narrow landing, the peeling paint on the opposite wall, and the dim bulb that flickered once every few seconds. He waited. After nearly a minute, he opened the door on the chain. The landing was empty. A brown envelope lay on the mat. No stamp, no address, no courier label. Marcus did not touch it at first. He looked down the stairwell, then up toward the next landing. The building seemed to be holding its breath. Finally, using the sleeve of his jumper, he lifted the envelope and carried it inside. There was a single photograph inside. It showed Marcus seated at his desk the previous night, taken from outside his kitchen window. On the back, written in black marker, were 6 words. "The map is not for you." By the time Marcus arrived at the broadcast center that evening, he had already checked the photograph 12 times. He did not count the checks as reassurance. He counted them as evidence handling. That was the compromise he allowed himself, though some quieter part of him knew the distinction had begun to thin. The photograph remained inside a clear plastic sleeve he had taken from a folder of tenancy documents. He had not touched the glossy surface directly. In the image, he sat at his desk in the blue-white light of the monitor, shoulders hunched, head turned slightly toward the screen. The angle was high and awkward, taken from beyond the kitchen window, probably from the rear fire escape of the building opposite, or the flat roof above the closed shop unit. It was not a professional surveillance photograph, but it did not need to be. It had done its work. It proved that someone knew where he lived, and it proved they had known before he understood what he was seeing. The bus to the industrial estate felt different that night. Marcus sat near the middle, away from the doors, holding his tote bag on his knees. He watched reflections in the dark windows instead of the streets outside. Every passenger became briefly suspicious and then embarrassingly ordinary. A nurse in dark blue scrubs scrolling through messages. A man with paint on his trousers asleep with his chin on his chest. 2 teenagers sharing earbuds, whispering and laughing. A woman carrying flowers wrapped in brown paper. The city continued to behave as though nothing beneath it had shifted. At the staff entrance, Marcus held his ID badge to the reader. The light blinked red. For a moment, he did not understand. He tried again, slower this time, aligning the badge flat against the sensor. Red. The rain tapped on the canopy above him. Behind the glass door, the empty reception corridor stretched toward the security desk, where a night guard he did not recognize was looking at a tablet. Marcus pressed the intercom. The guard glanced up, frowned, and walked over. "Badge not working," Marcus said, keeping his voice neutral. The guard looked at the reader, then at Marcus. "Name? Marcus Thorne, compliance, night shift." The man checked the tablet. He was younger than Marcus, broad-faced, with a shaved head and a security lanyard too new to have softened at the edges. "You're not showing active for tonight." Marcus felt the first cold movement inside his chest. "That's wrong." "Schedule says amended." "By whom?" The guard gave the tired half shrug of someone who had no interest in owning another department's problem. "Doesn't say here." Marcus could see his own reflection in the glass between them, distorted by rain. "I'm assigned to Control Suite 3. I've worked Thursdays for 9 months." "System says no." "Call network duty." The guard hesitated, then returned to the desk and made a call. Marcus waited outside, rain misting against his face. Across the car park, the transmission mast blinked red into the low cloud. Somewhere inside that building, live feeds were flowing through systems Marcus understood better than almost anyone scheduled at night. Somewhere inside, perhaps, another single frame was waiting to be inserted and ignored. The guard returned. "You can come in, but you need to report to operations before accessing compliance." Temporary exception. The door clicked open. Marcus stepped inside. The warmth of the building hit him with its usual smell of dust, electronics, instant coffee, and cleaning fluid. He signed in on paper, a thing no one had asked him to do in years, and clipped a visitor sticker beneath his real ID badge. The indignity was small, but the message was not. Someone had touched his schedule. Someone had touched his access. The change might have been bureaucratic, a clerical mistake, a rota adjustment made by an exhausted manager. But Marcus had lived too long with his own mind to accept every fear as proof, and too long inside technical systems to dismiss a chain of anomalies as coincidence. Operations was on the first floor, beyond a row of meeting rooms that smelled faintly of old carpet. The duty supervisor, Martin Kell, sat beneath a harsh ceiling light with a takeaway coffee and a spreadsheet open on one monitor. Martin was a man who believed most problems could be solved by sounding annoyed at them. He had worked in broadcast operations since before half the building had gone digital and treated every new security protocol as an insult to common sense. "Marcus," he said, not looking pleased, "you weren't meant to be in tonight. I was meant to be in tonight until someone changed it." Martin leaned back. "Rota adjustment came through this afternoon. You're on days next week for audit prep." "I wasn't informed. You should have had an email." "I didn't." Martin clicked through another window. "Well, that's what it says." "Who approved it?" Martin's expression tightened. "Why?" "Because my access failed at the door. My schedule changed without notice. And last night I logged a possible unauthorized frame insertion on the regional feed." For the first time, Martin stopped moving. "A what?" Marcus chose his words carefully. "A single frame anomaly in outgoing transmission. Source file clean. Outgoing archive affected. Possible insertion between playout and final path." Martin stared at him for a moment, then gave a short breath through his nose. "You're serious?" "Yes." "Did you log it? Locally? Not formally?" "I was verifying before escalation." Martin rubbed his forehead with 2 fingers. "Marcus, that is exactly the sort of thing you escalate immediately. And if the escalation channel is compromised..." The room changed after he said it. Not visibly, the monitors still glowed, the coffee still steamed. Rain still ran down the dark window behind Martin's desk. But something in Martin's face closed, and Marcus realized too late how the sentence sounded. Not technical, not cautious, paranoid. Martin lowered his voice. "Are you all right?" There it was. Not "are you sure?" Not "show me," not "what did you find?" "Are you all right?" Marcus felt heat rise behind his eyes, sharp and humiliating. He had prepared for disbelief. He had not prepared for concern to feel worse. "I'm fit for duty," he said. "I didn't ask that." "I know what you asked." Martin looked toward the door, as if calculating whether to bring someone else into the conversation. "Look, take the temporary access and sit in Suite 3 tonight if it helps. But no deep server queries, no unscheduled exports, no digging through archive without a ticket. We've got a security audit next week, and I do not need unusual traffic under your login." Marcus heard the phrase as if it had been placed there deliberately. "Unusual traffic under your login." "Has there been unusual traffic?" he asked. Martin hesitated half a second too long. "I'm saying don't create any." "That isn't what I asked." "Marcus." The warning in his tone was soft, almost kind. Marcus understood then that the building itself had begun to turn against him. Not because everyone inside was involved. That would have been simpler and less frightening. No, it was worse than that. The systems had been nudged just enough to make him look unstable if he pushed too hard. A failed badge, an unexplained rota change, a supervisor already worried about audit logs, his own history sitting silently in every room before he entered. He left operations with temporary access and no answers. Control Suite 3 was as he had left it, but it no longer felt like his controlled world. The monitors shone in their familiar grid. The incident forms were stacked neatly in the tray. His white mug sat by the keyboard, handle turned slightly left. Someone had moved it. Only a little. Marcus stood in the doorway looking at it. A year ago, the sight might have trapped him for half an hour. Correct it. Do not correct it. Correct it because no one will know. Leave it because leaving it proves you are well, but if you leave it, you will think about it all night. The old machinery offered its hooks quickly. He walked past the mug without touching it. That small victory lasted until he opened his local incident folder. Visual fault 021-743 was gone. Marcus did not move for several seconds. Then he checked the path again. He checked hidden files. He checked recent deletions. He checked the isolated review folder, then the local export cache, then the audit trail available from his console. No deletion recorded. No access recorded. The file had not been removed in the way files were removed by people who expected systems to notice. It had been erased in the way systems erase things when told by someone with the authority to rewrite what had happened. Marcus sat slowly. The room hummed around him. For a moment, fear became almost pure and strangely calm. The Holbeck frame was gone from his workstation. The printed warning remained at home. The photograph remained in his bag. The other frames existed only in his notes and in temporary copies on his home terminal, unless someone had already reached those too. He checked the live feed schedule. Late-night archive programming would begin at 1:55. Old documentary block, regional filler, low audience, perfect conditions. Marcus opened a new blank log and began monitoring manually. At 02:03, his internal extension rang. He let it ring twice before answering. No one spoke. Only the faint line noise of an open connection. Then a woman's voice, elderly and dry, came through so quietly he almost missed it. "You're not the first monitor to see it." Marcus gripped the receiver. "Who is this?" A pause. "Ask about Daniel Vale," the woman whispered. "Ask why he stopped watching." The line went dead. Marcus remained with the receiver pressed to his ear long after the call had ended. On the central monitor, the old documentary began with a burst of archive music. And exactly 12 minutes later, the picture flickered again. The flicker lasted less than a breath. To anyone watching the documentary at home, if anyone in Leeds was awake and watching at all, it would have looked like nothing more than a momentary flaw in old footage. A flash of grey. A brief loss of picture. The kind of harmless imperfection people no longer complained about because the night was late, the program was dull, and the world had taught them to expect small failures from machines. Marcus did not blink. His hand was already on the capture control before the frame passed. The buffer saved silently. The documentary continued. On screen, a man in a flat cap stood beside a row of brick arches and spoke without sound beneath the narrator's polished voice. The words meant nothing now. The program was only a hiding place. Marcus isolated the frame. Static filled the review monitor. He sat forward, every muscle held in place by a discipline that felt close to pain. He did not run the filter immediately. He forced himself to follow procedure. Timestamp, channel ID, program title, source verification, outgoing path, local capture checksum. He wrote each detail into the blank log as if a future investigator might need to know not only what he had seen, but that he had still known how to behave while seeing it. Only then did he apply the first correction. The grey snow thinned. The hidden lines surfaced. This frame was different from the others. The earlier maps had revealed fragments, tunnels, voids, access passages, culverts, old service chambers. Each had looked like part of a larger plan torn into pieces and smuggled through the broadcast stream. But the new frame carried more than structure. It contained symbols layered over the routes, small black squares at specific points, each marked with 2 or 3 characters. There were arrows indicating direction of movement, not engineering arrows, operational arrows. Marcus zoomed in. At the lower edge of the image, the label came clear after 3 passes through the edge filter. Albion Node. He stared at it. Albion Street ran through the city centre, above a landscape of shops, offices, cellars, and redeveloped commercial space, whose lower levels had been altered so many times that older plans contradicted one another. Marcus knew the area only as a pedestrian. Lunch hour crowds, bus stops, glass frontages, the hard echo of footsteps under covered walkways. But beneath it, according to the ghost frame, was another logic altogether. 3 subterranean lines converged near a rectangular chamber marked V3. From that chamber, a narrow route led toward a larger shape outlined in double white. Marcus adjusted the contrast again, and a second label emerged beside it, broken but legible enough. Hold fast. The phrase sat there like a joke told by someone who did not smile. Marcus copied the frame to a removable diagnostic module, one approved for internal fault transfers. Then he stopped. The file from the previous night had vanished from his local folder. If he saved this one in the same way, it might disappear too. If he tried to export it through any ordinary channel, the action might be logged under the very unusual traffic Martin had warned him against. He looked around the control suite. The monitors threw pale light over the desk, the empty chairs, the glass wall, the mute corridor beyond. The white mug remained where someone had left it, handle angled wrong. Marcus had still not touched it. He took out his phone, then remembered the biscuit tin at home, the SIM card removed. the voicemail with its buried tone. The work handset would be logged. A screenshot from the monitor might trigger detection. Printing might wake whatever had sent him the first warning. For a moment he felt cornered by the very systems meant to preserve truth. Then he reached for the oldest tool in the room, a paper incident pad. Marcus began to draw. He was not a trained draftsman, but the act steadied him. Lines became manageable when pulled through a pen. He sketched the route network, the chamber shapes, the symbols, the label placements. He marked uncertainty with dotted lines rather than filling gaps from memory. When his hand trembled, he paused until it stopped. At 02:31, the internal messaging window lit up. Martin Kell, seeing archive access under your session, keep it minimal. Marcus had not opened the archive. He checked the session list. His username was active twice, once in Control Suite 3, once in Archive Terminal B, a room on the floor below. A sensation moved through him slowly, colder than fear. Someone was using his credentials inside the building while he sat at the console being watched by the system. The duplicate session was not a glitch now. It was a hand wearing his glove. He stood. The sensible action was to call Martin. The correct action was to report an active credential compromise. But the earlier conversation replayed instantly. No deep server queries, no unusual traffic. Are you all right? If Marcus reported the duplicate session now, would it prove he was cautious? Or would it become one more entry in a file already being shaped around him? He locked his console and stepped into the corridor. The broadcast center sounded different away from the monitors. In the suite, the hum had been constant and abstract. In the corridor, each sound had direction, air conditioning through vents, a distant lift motor, rainwater ticking down an exterior pipe. Somewhere, the hollow clunk of a fire door settling into its frame. Marcus walked toward the stairwell. He kept his pace normal because cameras covered the corridor and normality mattered. He passed a framed safety notice, a wall-mounted defibrillator, a locked cupboard labeled emergency media packs. He pressed his temporary badge to the stairwell reader. Green. For now, Archive Terminal B was in a semi-secure room off the lower technical corridor, used mostly by engineers when they needed direct access to deep storage without occupying the main compliance consoles. Marcus had worked there years earlier when the equipment was less automated and the building still smelled of dust from old tape vaults. The lower corridor retained some of that age. The ceiling was lower, the paint had yellowed around vents. Pipes ran exposed along one wall, labeled in careful black lettering no one had updated for decades. As he reached the bend before Archive B, he heard typing. Not loud, not hurried. Measured keystrokes. Marcus stopped just short of the doorway. The room beyond had a narrow observation window in the door. Through the wired glass, he saw the glow of a monitor and the silhouette of someone seated at the terminal. The person wore a dark hooded jacket, not station uniform, not contractor high-vis. The face was turned away. Marcus's first thought was not heroic. It was embarrassingly practical. He had no authority here that mattered if the person inside already had his credentials. He backed away one step. The typing stopped. Marcus froze. For several seconds, neither of them moved. Then the figure inside turned slightly, as if listening. Marcus stepped back again, quieter this time, and felt his shoulder brush the wall. The corridor's automatic light flickered. The sound was small, a plastic tick inside the sensor housing, but the figure stood. Marcus turned and walked away without running. At the stairwell door, he heard Archive B open behind him. He did not look back until he was inside the stairwell and moving upward. One flight, two flights, breath held in short, controlled bursts. No footsteps followed. That absence did not comfort him. It suggested the person had not needed to chase. By the time Marcus returned to Control Suite 3, the duplicate session had ended. His console was still locked. His sketch remained beneath the incident pad cover. Nothing appeared disturbed, yet when he unlocked the system, a new window was open. Not one of his tools. A plain text file. The message contained only 3 words. Daniel Vale knew. Marcus did not touch the keyboard. Daniel Vale. The name from the woman's phone call had now appeared inside his locked session, placed there by someone who wanted him to follow it, or someone who wanted him to know that following it had already been anticipated. He photographed the screen with the small digital camera kept in the equipment drawer for documenting physical faults. It was old, company issued, and not connected to the network. Then he closed the text file and searched the internal staff directory. No Daniel Vale. He searched former staff records available through the standard HR archive. That access was limited, but old rota documents and incident acknowledgements sometimes remained indexed for operational continuity. The first search returned nothing. He tried D. Vale, then Vale, Daniel, then Daniel V. A result appeared in a scanned PDF from 9 years earlier. Night Compliance Rota, January. Daniel Vale had been a broadcast monitoring technician. Marcus opened the file. The scan was poor, grey at the edges, but the name was clear. Daniel Vale had worked nights in the same building, in the same department, long before Marcus took the graveyard role. Then, abruptly, the name vanished from later rotas. No farewell note, no transfer announcement, no internal obituary, no easy explanation. Marcus searched again, widening beyond HR fragments into archived incident logs. Most were routine: signal drops, weather-related transmitter faults, local advert misfires, complaints about late subtitles. Then, buried under an incorrectly tagged maintenance folder, he found a restricted incident summary from 8 years earlier. The title had been almost aggressively bland. Unauthorized pattern capture review. His access should not have opened it. But it did. The file contained only 6 pages. Most of the details had been redacted, not with black bars, but through missing sections in the scanned record, as if pages had been partially copied after removal. Marcus read what remained. A night technician had reported intermittent single-frame anomalies during low-audience transmission windows. The anomalies were initially classified as archival degradation. The technician escalated concerns after identifying repeated geometric structures within the frames. A review panel concluded that the patterns were the product of over-analysis under workplace stress. No malicious insertion was confirmed. The technician's name was removed from the body, but the appendix had not been cleaned properly. D. Vale. Marcus felt a strange, grim tenderness for this unknown man. Someone else had sat in the night and watched the static arrange itself into meaning. Someone else had tried to explain that the fault was not a fault. Someone else had discovered how quickly evidence could become a symptom when the person presenting it looked too closely. He kept reading. The final page contained a handwritten note scanned crookedly into the file. It appeared to be a supervisor's memo, perhaps never meant to remain attached. Vale has become fixated on supposed ghost frames, recommending leave pending occupational health assessment, remove from overnight monitoring duties, avoid further discussion of pattern content. Below that, in a different hand, someone had written a single sentence before the page had been copied. He says they are maps. Marcus sat back. There it was. 8 years before him, Daniel Vale had seen the same thing and had been removed from the position where he could keep seeing it. The mystery was no longer expanding outward, it was deepening backward. He searched for Daniel Vale outside the company system using a public terminal browser with restricted tracking. The results were thin. A few old electoral register traces, a possible address in Morley, a brief mention in a local charity newsletter from years earlier thanking a Daniel Vale for repairing audio equipment. No social media presence that looked current, no professional profile, no death notice. Then Marcus found a forum post cached from an obsolete broadcast engineering discussion board. The username was dvale77. The post was dated 8 years ago, 3 months after his disappearance from the rota. Most of it concerned a technical question about frame-level insertion vulnerabilities in legacy playout systems. It was dry, careful, and written by someone trying not to sound alarmed. But beneath the main post, in a reply to another user, Daniel had written something Marcus read 3 times. If a signal is brief enough, the audience never sees it. If it is structured enough, but a machine does. Marcus copied the line by hand. As he finished, an alert appeared on the live feed monitor. Incoming call, external line, the same line that had carried the elderly woman's whisper. Marcus let it ring once, twice, then he answered. For a moment there was only breathing, not elderly this time, A man's voice came through, low and uneven, as if the speaker had not used it much that day. "Do not trust the files they left you," he said. Marcus's hand tightened around the receiver. "Daniel Vale." The breathing stopped. Then the man said, "If you found Albion, they're already inside the banks." The line clicked dead, and on the monitor in front of Marcus, the old documentary cut suddenly to black. The black screen lasted 4 seconds. In broadcast terms, 4 seconds was not an accident. It was long enough for monitoring alarms to register, long enough for automated continuity systems to prepare a fallback. Long enough for someone half asleep in a terraced house in Bramley or a night porter in a Leeds hotel to look up and wonder whether the television had finally given up. Then the documentary returned as if nothing had happened, the narrator's voice resuming mid-sentence over a faded shot of men in council overalls lowering tools into a trench. Marcus remained still with the dead receiver in his hand. "If you found Albion, they're already inside the banks." The sentence was too direct to be dismissed as theatre. It landed with the blunt weight of someone who had already paid for knowing more than he should. Marcus lowered the phone into its cradle and looked at the live feed monitor. The system log showed a minor transmission interruption, automatically classified as source instability. No emergency flag, no escalation, no record of the external call beyond a bland line entry. Voice circuit active, duration 000019. He wrote the time down, 0249. Then beneath it, he wrote the words exactly as he remembered them. "Do not trust the files they left you. If you found Albion, they're already inside the banks." His pen paused over the page. They. The word had shape now. Not a prankster, not an anonymous engineer, not one compromised server. A coordinated group, sophisticated enough to place maps inside single broadcast frames, cautious enough to monitor who captured them, and confident enough to interfere with his work, his schedule, his home, and the station's internal records. Marcus looked at the control room door. The corridor beyond the glass wall was empty, but emptiness had lost its innocence. Every reflection held another possible angle. Every dark monitor seemed capable of turning into a witness against him. He needed to report something, not everything. Everything would sound impossible. He opened the incident management system and began drafting a formal escalation about the 4-second blackout and suspected unauthorized access to the playout chain. He kept the language technical. He omitted the banks. He omitted Daniel Vale. He omitted the photograph. He attached no ghost frame. Instead, he referenced log inconsistencies and duplicate sessions requiring urgent security review. When he clicked submit, the system froze. The spinning icon turned for nearly a minute. Then a red banner appeared. Insufficient permissions to create incident. Marcus stared at it. He tried again. Same result. He checked his account status. His role had been changed, not fully removed. That would have been too obvious. He could still monitor. He could still view scheduled feeds. He could still perform basic compliance tasks. But escalation privileges, archive export permission, and incident creation access had been revoked at 0246, 3 minutes before Daniel Vale's call. The authorization note read, "Temporary audit restriction. Approved by M. Thorne." Marcus felt a quiet pressure build behind his ribs. Someone had used his own account to limit his ability to report the intrusion, then made it appear as if he had approved the restriction himself. It was elegant in its cruelty. If he protested, he would not merely be claiming sabotage, he would be claiming sabotage under his own name. He stood and walked to the small kitchenette beside the compliance suite. The light came on with a weak flicker. The sink was stained with tea. Someone had left a spoon on a paper towel. A refrigerator hummed beneath a notice reminding staff to label personal food. Marcus filled a plastic cup with water and drank slowly. His hands were shaking. He watched them until the shaking became less of a command and more of a fact. A person could shake and still act. At 0312, Martin Kell came into the control suite without knocking. He wore the same tired annoyance as before, but now there was something else behind it. Worry, perhaps, or irritation sharpened by a call from someone above him. He shut the glass door and lowered his voice. "What are you doing, Marcus?" Marcus turned from the console, monitoring the feed. You attempted to submit a security incident. Yes, after I told you not to generate unusual traffic. A 4-second black event occurred in live transmission. My permissions were then altered under my own account. Martin's eyes moved to the monitors, then back. Your permissions were restricted because you're under audit review. That started tonight? I don't control audit. Who does? Martin rubbed his face. You need to go home. The words entered the room softly, but changed its dimensions. Marcus looked at him. Is that an instruction? It's advice. From you. From someone who knows when a man is making things worse for himself. There was no malice in Martin's voice. That was what made it difficult. He did not sound like a conspirator. He sounded like a supervisor watching an employee unravel under stress and hoping to contain it before paperwork became unavoidable. Marcus had imagined opposition as a locked door or a threat in the dark. Instead, it arrived as professional concern, administrative language, and the terrible plausibility of his own medical history. He reached into his bag and removed the plastic sleeve containing the photograph from his kitchen window. Martin's expression shifted before he spoke. Where did that come from? My flat, this morning. Martin took a step closer, then stopped himself. Is that you? Yes. Who took it? I don't know. Martin stared at the image. For a few seconds, his disbelief faltered. Marcus saw it happen. The photograph was physical. It did not depend on static, maps, or his interpretation of old frames. It was a man sitting in his own home, watched without consent. Then Martin's face closed again, not because the evidence had failed, but because it had become inconvenient. You should take this to the police, he said. I tried to create an internal incident first. Not about the broadcast, about this. They're connected. Martin exhaled. Marcus. Again, the name said too much. Marcus slid the photograph back into his bag. You don't believe me. I believe you're scared. That isn't the same thing. No, Martin said quietly. It isn't. For a moment, the two men stood in the hum of the control suite with the whole building pressing around them. Servers, policies, cameras, staff records, transmission logs, archived programs, and somewhere inside it all, a hidden path that someone had been using for years. Martin spoke first. Go home, sleep. In the morning, call HR, call occupational health if you need to, and report the photograph to West Yorkshire Police. But do not sit here all night chasing patterns through dead footage. I can't protect you from that if it goes upstairs. Marcus almost laughed, but the sound would have come out wrong. Protect. The word had become another kind of cage. He did not go home immediately. Martin stayed while Marcus closed his session, gathered his notebook, and placed the old digital camera in his tote bag beneath a folded jumper. If Martin noticed, he said nothing. At the security desk, the temporary visitor sticker was removed and placed in a disposal tray. The guard wished him a good morning without looking up. Outside, the rain had stopped. The industrial estate was slick and silent, its puddles reflecting sodium lights and the red pulse of the mast. Marcus stood under the canopy, the same place he always paused after a night shift. But this time, there was no transition. Work had followed him home. Home had followed him back to work. The line between inside and outside had been erased. He did not take the bus. He walked until the estate thinned into wider roads and early delivery vans began moving toward the city. Dawn had not arrived, but the sky had loosened from black into a deep, exhausted blue. Leeds sat ahead of him in layers. Office towers, old brick, railway spans, cranes, glass, stone, and beneath all of it, routes no one above ground thought about. At 05:38, his sister Alice called. Marcus stopped beneath a railway bridge, the sound of a distant train shuddering overhead. He answered because not answering would worry her more. Marcus? Her voice was tight. Why have I had a call from someone at your work? He closed his eyes. What did they say? They said you've been under strain, that you were sent home, that if I noticed anything concerning, I should encourage you to contact your doctor. The train passed above him, metal screaming softly against metal. Marcus leaned against the damp brick wall. They called you? Yes. They said it was welfare procedure. Of course they had. Not an attack, not a threat, welfare, concern. A neat institutional hand placed on the shoulder of the one person in his family who had seen him at his worst. Alice lowered her voice. "Mark, tell me honestly, are you safe?" He looked down the road toward the sleeping city and thought of the ghost frame labeled Albion Node. He thought of Daniel Vale's voice, frightened and certain. He thought of the photograph taken through his kitchen window. He thought of the permission change approved under his own name. "No," he said. There was silence on the line. Then Alice said carefully, "Are you in danger from someone else or from yourself?" The question struck harder than he expected. Marcus opened his mouth, but no answer came quickly enough. At the far end of the bridge, a black car that had been parked with its lights off started its engine. Its headlights came on, and slowly, without signaling, it pulled out toward him. The car moved slowly enough to pretend it was not following him. That was the first thing Marcus noticed. It did not surge forward. It did not make the mistake of drama. Its headlights spread across the wet road beneath the railway bridge, whitening the old brick, the weeds at the curb, the thin stream of rainwater running along the gutter. The engine gave a low, controlled murmur. On the phone, Alice was still waiting. "Marcus," she said. He stepped away from the wall and began walking. Not toward the car, not directly away from it, but across the road at an angle toward the pavement on the opposite side. A lorry passed at the junction beyond the bridge, its trailer hissing through shallow water. The car slowed to let it go, then continued. "Where are you?" Alice asked. "Near the station approaches," Marcus said, "under the bridge off Whitehall Road." "Mark, what's happening? I need you to listen carefully. Don't call my work. Don't speak to anyone from the center if they ring again. If anyone asks whether you've heard from me, say no." The words sounded absurd as soon as he said them. They sounded like the kind of words a family member remembered later with pain when describing the moment they realized someone had crossed beyond reach. Alice heard it too. Her breathing changed. "Marcus, you're frightening me." "I know." "Then slow down. Tell me one thing that is real." The car was now 20 yards behind him. A black saloon, maybe a BMW, maybe something similar. Its number plate was partially obscured by road grime. The windscreen reflected the pale bridge lights, making the driver invisible. "One thing that is real," Marcus repeated. He looked ahead. A small 24-hour petrol station sat beyond the next junction, its canopy lights bright against the early dark. A man in a high-visibility jacket was stacking newspapers inside the shop. Cameras would cover the forecourt. Light, witnesses, routine. "I have a photograph," Marcus said. "Someone took it through my kitchen window last night. I showed it to Martin. He saw it." Alice was silent for half a second. "Your supervisor saw it?" "Yes." "And he still sent you home?" "Yes." That detail seemed to reach her differently. Marcus heard the first shift in her voice, not belief exactly, but the beginning of doubt aimed away from him. "Go somewhere public," she said. "I am." "Stay on the phone." The car followed him through the junction. Marcus did not run. Running would turn suspicion into pursuit, and pursuit into something no one could later explain as coincidence. He crossed into the petrol station forecourt and walked straight to the shop. The automatic door opened with a tired chime. Warm air smelled of coffee, floor cleaner, and sausage rolls under heat lamps. The black car passed the forecourt without turning in. Marcus watched it continue down the road, brake lights briefly glowing red at the far bend before it disappeared. He stood among shelves of crisps and screen wash, holding the phone to his ear, feeling suddenly ridiculous and alive. "Is it gone?" Alice asked. "For now." "For now," she repeated, and the phrase seemed to frighten her more because she had said it herself. Marcus bought a bottle of water he did not want and a paper map of Leeds from a rotating rack that looked as if no one had touched it in years. He paid in cash. The cashier barely looked at him. Outside, morning had begun to gather at the edges of the city, a dull wash of grey behind rooftops and railway lines. Alice wanted him to come to York. He wanted to say yes. For a moment, he imagined it. Her kitchen table, her husband making tea badly but earnestly, the children being kept upstairs because adults were speaking in low voices. He could hand over the photograph. He could sleep in the spare room. He could let someone else hold the problem while he stopped performing competence long enough to collapse. But Daniel Vale's warning had not been about Marcus. If you found Albion, they're already inside the banks. Whatever the ghost frames were mapping, they were not waiting for him to feel better. "I can't leave Leeds," he said. Alice's voice hardened. "Marcus, I need one day. You need help." "Yes." "Then let me help." He looked at the paper map under his arm. It showed the city only from above. Roads, parks, railway stations, civic buildings, rivers, retail zones. No chambers, no service corridors, no forgotten brick arteries beneath the streets. An honest map, and therefore an incomplete one. "There's someone I need to find," Marcus said. "Who?" "Daniel Vale." He expected Alice to ask what that meant, but instead she paused with a recognition Marcus did not understand. "Vale," she said. "Yes. Spell it." He did. Another silence followed, longer this time. "A man by that name called me once," Alice said. Marcus stopped walking. "When?" "Years ago. I don't remember exactly. After you started at the broadcast center, maybe, or just before. He asked whether I was your next of kin." The forecourt seemed to tilt around him. "What did you tell him?" "Nothing. I thought it was some scam. He sounded strange. Not drunk, not threatening, just frightened. He said if you ever mentioned frames, I should tell you not to chase them." Marcus closed his eyes. The city noise went thin for a moment, reduced to tires on wet roads and the low buzz of petrol station lights. "Why didn't you tell me?" he asked. "Because you hadn't mentioned frames. Because it sounded like nonsense. Because at the time, Marcus, you were trying very hard to stay well, and I didn't want to put some stranger's fear into your head." He could not blame her. That made it worse. "Do you still have the number?" "It was years ago. Please check." "I'll look," she said, "but promise me something. Stay where there are people." Marcus looked around. Dawn commuters were beginning to appear on the pavements. A cyclist in waterproof trousers waited at the lights. A delivery driver smoked beside a van. The city was waking, and with it came the strange protection of witnesses who did not know they were witnesses. "I promise," he said. He ended the call only after Alice made him repeat the promise twice. Then he walked toward Leeds station. The concourse at that hour had the hollow energy of early travel. Coffee machines hissing, rolling suitcases clacking over tiles, commuters staring into phones with faces not yet arranged for the day. Marcus chose a bench beneath a departure board and opened the paper map. He marked Holbeck, Kirkgate, Albion Street. Then from memory he placed approximate marks for the other ghost frames. The points did not form a circle or a straight line. They formed something less obvious, a sequence of access and convergence, a route into the city's financial core. The banks Daniel Vale had mentioned were not necessarily all banks anymore. Buildings changed names, branches closed, vaults were repurposed, basements rented as storage or server rooms. But the old protections remained useful to anyone who knew how to reach them from below. At 0642, Alice sent a text. Found old note, number disconnected, but I wrote down address he mentioned. Victoria Foundry Workshops, Armley. Unit 6, said not to go alone. Marcus stared at the screen. Victoria Foundry Workshops. He knew the name vaguely. A cluster of old industrial units converted into studios, repair shops and small storage spaces on the western side of the city, where Leeds still carried the soot-darkened bones of its manufacturing past. It was exactly the kind of place where a man could vanish without leaving the city. At 0710, Marcus took a taxi from the station rank. He considered buses, then rejected them. Too slow, too exposed, too easy to anticipate if someone knew his habits. The driver was a woman in her 50s, with a Leeds accent and a dashboard crowded with air fresheners shaped like fruit. She complained about roadworks within 30 seconds, which Marcus found unexpectedly comforting. "Armley, love," she said, glancing at him in the mirror. "Bit early for the workshops." "Meeting someone. Aren't we all?" She drove through streets just beginning to fill, past shuttered shops, damp brick terraces, delivery bays, small cafes with chairs still stacked inside. Leeds in morning light looked less mysterious and more tired. That helped Marcus think. If Daniel Vale was alive, he had remained close enough to monitor the pattern and far enough away to survive it. He had warned Alice years earlier. He had called Marcus through an external line that reached the broadcast center despite whatever internal systems were being watched. He had known about Albion, but he had also said not to trust the files they left you. That meant some evidence had been planted, or altered, or designed to lead Marcus to the wrong conclusion at the right speed. The taxi turned into a narrow side road where old industrial buildings stood behind metal gates and faded signs. Victoria Foundry workshops occupied a long brick structure with arched windows, many of them painted over from the inside. A courtyard lay beyond the gate, patched with puddles and oil stains. Units had been marked with black numbers on white boards. A bicycle repair shop, a furniture restorer, a ceramics studio, a closed roller shutter with no sign. Unit 6 was at the far end. The taxi driver looked at it, then at Marcus. "You sure?" "Yes." "You want me to wait?" He almost said no. Pride nearly answered for him. Then he remembered Alice's words and the black car under the bridge. 5 minutes, he said. "Please." The driver nodded. Meters running, Marcus stepped into the courtyard. The air smelled of wet brick, engine oil, and old metal. Somewhere nearby, a radio played quietly behind a closed door. He approached Unit 6 and saw no bell, only a rusted letter slot and a reinforced steel door with 3 locks. Beside the frame, someone had mounted a small camera, its black lens no larger than a coin. Before Marcus could knock, a speaker crackled above him. "Turn around." The voice was male, low, and familiar from the call. Marcus looked up at the camera. "Daniel Vale? Turn around, Marcus." He did. At the entrance to the courtyard beyond the waiting taxi, the black saloon had stopped by the gate. Its engine was running. The taxi driver saw it too. Her window slid down. "Friend of yours?" she called. Marcus did not answer. The speaker crackled again. "Inside, now!" The locks on Unit 6 released one after another with heavy mechanical clicks. Marcus opened the steel door and stepped into darkness. It closed behind him before his eyes had time to adjust. For a moment there was only the smell of dust, warm electronics, and damp concrete. Then a desk lamp clicked on. Daniel Vale sat at the far end of the room, older than Marcus expected, thinner than his voice suggested, with a greying beard, hollow cheeks, and eyes that seemed to have spent years refusing sleep. Behind him, covering an entire wall, were hundreds of printed ghost frames. Some were maps, some were symbols. Some showed buildings Marcus recognized from the city above. And in the center of the wall, circled in red, was a photograph of Marcus taken outside the broadcast center years before he had ever noticed the static. Daniel Vale did not ask Marcus to sit down. For several seconds, neither man spoke. The room inside Unit 6 seemed to exist outside the ordinary morning. It had no windows facing the courtyard, only 2 narrow panes high on the rear wall, painted over from the inside with something dark and uneven. The air smelled of heated dust, old paper, solder, damp brick, and the faint bitterness of instant coffee left too long in a mug. Somewhere above them, rainwater dripped steadily through a gutter, the sound traveling through the building's bones like a clock no one had wound. Marcus stood just inside the steel door, his eyes drawn again and again to the wall. Hundreds of ghost frames had been printed, enlarged, annotated, layered with acetate sheets and colored thread. Some were little more than grey static fields with faint marks circled in pencil. Others had been processed until the hidden structures emerged in stark black and white. Tunnels, chambers, commercial basements, old culverts, access shafts, maintenance routes, blind corridors. The wall was not chaotic. At first glance, it looked like obsession. At second glance, it looked like research. At third, it became something worse. A city beneath the city. Not imagined. Documented. Marcus's gaze returned to the photograph at the center. It showed him younger, perhaps 31 or 32, walking toward the broadcast center staff entrance with a backpack over one shoulder and an ID badge clipped to his jacket. His hair was longer then, his posture looser. It had been taken from a distance, through a lens that compressed the industrial estate into flat layers of fence, concrete, and sky. He had no memory of that day. Of course he did not. Why would he remember walking into work years before anything happened? Daniel Vale watched him from behind the desk. He was in his late 40s or early 50s, though hardship had made the number difficult to read. His face was narrow and colorless under the desk lamp, his beard untrimmed but clean, his hands resting flat on the table as if to show they held no weapon. He wore a heavy cardigan over a thermal shirt, the sort of clothing chosen by a man who spent more time managing cold rooms than meeting people. "You were marked before you saw anything," Daniel said. Marcus did not answer immediately. The sentence moved through him slowly, touching one fear after another. Behind him, through the steel door, he could no longer hear the taxi. He could not hear the black saloon either. The outside world had become sealed away. "What does that mean?" Marcus asked. Daniel gave a tired, humorless smile. "It means they choose watchers before watchers choose evidence. That isn't an answer." "No," Daniel said. "It's what's left when the answers are too dangerous to say quickly." Marcus took one step farther into the room. The floor was concrete, cracked and stained in places where old machinery had once stood. Against one wall sat racks of obsolete recording equipment, VHS decks, broadcast monitors, timecode generators, satellite receivers, hard drives labeled by hand, 2 spectrum analyzers, and a stack of small digital capture devices wired into a system that looked improvised but carefully maintained. On another table were paper maps of Leeds, ordnance survey sheets, old drainage surveys, planning records, and photocopied council documents with margins full of Daniel's cramped handwriting. It was a private archive built by a man no institution had believed. Marcus knew what that kind of isolation could do to the mind. The thought came with an unwelcome edge of self-recognition. Daniel seemed to read it. "You're wondering whether I'm mad." Marcus looked back at him. "I'm wondering whether I am." That, finally, made Daniel's expression change. Not soften exactly, but something in his face loosened. "They counted on that with me," he said. "They'll count on it with you." "Who are they?" Daniel leaned back in his chair. The springs creaked under him. "A syndicate. Not the sort newspapers like to name. No matching tattoos, no dramatic leader, no single family with a pub everyone whispers about. Think smaller pieces. Contractors, former security consultants, debt collectors, transport men. A few people inside institutions who understand old systems better than new managers do. They don't own the city. They use the parts of it nobody wants to look at. And the ghost frames? Operational distribution." Marcus's mouth felt dry. Maps, timing marks, access notes, confirmation codes, sometimes warnings, sometimes updates. They hide them in late-night broadcast vaults because the audience doesn't see them and the machines do. Daniel gestured toward the equipment racks. Old recorders, modified set-top boxes, cheap capture units hidden where no one asks questions. Back rooms, storage offices, vacant shops, building sites, staff rooms. Anything left tuned to the right regional feed at the right hour becomes a receiver. Marcus thought of the voicemail tone, the spectral trace, the handshake. "The audio frequency," he said. Daniel nodded slowly. "A wake signal tells devices to save the next anomaly instead of discarding it. Some are passive, some answer back through other channels. That's how they know when a frame lands. And when someone like me captures it." "Yes." The room seemed smaller. Marcus looked again at the wall. "Why television? Why not encrypted messaging?" "Because encrypted messaging admits there is a message. This doesn't. It passes as deterioration. A dirty frame, a bad source, a glitch. And if someone notices, the first explanation is always the person, not the signal." The sentence struck Marcus with a precision that made him look away. Daniel stood carefully as if his joints hurt and crossed to the wall. He pointed to a cluster of ghost frames pinned above the map of Albion Street. "I saw my first one 8 years ago," he said. "Old gardening program, Aero 228. I thought it was pattern noise. Then I saw another. Then another. I did what you did. Logged them, compared them, tried to escalate cleanly." "What happened?" Daniel's hand remained on the wall. "They turned my own methods against me. Access irregularities, anonymous welfare concerns, duplicate sessions, files appearing where I hadn't put them, files disappearing where I had. By the time I had enough to frighten someone sensible, Everyone sensible had already been told I wasn't well. Marcus remembered Martin's face, Alice's question under the bridge. Are you in danger from someone else or from yourself? Daniel turned back. They don't need everyone to be corrupt. They need institutions to behave like institutions, protect reputation, avoid liability, treat unusual claims as risk. Move the troublesome person away from the sensitive desk. Marcus swallowed. You were removed. I was assessed. The word carried a bitterness polished by years. Then I was placed on leave. Then I resigned before they could dismiss me. My wife left 6 months later. She didn't think I was lying. That was the worst of it. She thought I believed every word and that believing it was killing me. For a moment, the room held more grief than fear. Marcus looked at the photograph of himself again. Why did you have that? Daniel did not answer immediately. I kept watching the center after I left. Not always. Not like this at first. I told myself I was trying to understand the system. Then, one day, your name appeared in a rota leak I was monitoring. Night compliance, same suite, same hours I used to work. A month later, this arrived in a dead drop with no note. A dead drop from whom? I don't know. You expect me to believe someone sent you my photograph and you kept it for years without contacting me? I did contact your sister. Marcus's anger rose quickly, sharpened by exhaustion. You called my family and said nothing useful. I said enough for her to remember. You frightened her. I was trying not to frighten you. Daniel's voice roughened. Do you think I didn't know what it would sound like? A stranger calling to say your brother might one day see secret maps in television static. There was no version of that call that didn't sound insane. The anger had nowhere clean to go. Marcus held it because letting it spill would cost time and perhaps judgment. He pointed to the wall. What does Albion mean? Daniel's face changed again. Whatever fragile human moment had opened between them closed. Albion is the route that shouldn't exist, he said. Marcus moved closer to the wall. Daniel had assembled several frames into a composite around the Albion label. Thread connected access points from Holbeck to Kirkgate, from Kirkgate toward the city centre, then beneath a zone marked with several building footprints. Some were old bank branches, some were financial offices. One was a private secure storage facility operating under a bland corporate name near an old commercial basement complex. What is hold fast? Marcus asked. A target marker, not a motto, not a place name. A vault classification. Marcus studied the route. You said they're already inside the banks. They are inside the approach network, not the vaults, not yet. How do you know? Daniel pointed to 3 small black squares in the latest frame. These are device confirmations, receivers placed at route checkpoints. When a team passes, the system updates through burst signals and secondary channels. Albion frames started again because the route is active. They're no longer planning from outside. They're moving equipment into position. When? Daniel returned to the desk and pulled a file from beneath a metal weight. He laid it open. Inside were printed frames arranged by date and time, each with annotations. Marcus recognized the pattern. Broadcast windows between 02 Hunker and 03 Low audience programming scattered across regional feeds. Daniel had built a timeline. The final instruction hasn't aired yet, Daniel said, but the sequence suggests the operation is scheduled during your next full graveyard shift. Marcus felt the room narrow around him. Tomorrow night. Daniel nodded. Why my shift? Because they need a monitor they can discredit if anything goes wrong. Someone observant enough to catch what matters, vulnerable enough to be dismissed when he does. Marcus looked at him sharply. That sounds too convenient. It is convenient. That's why it works. No, Marcus stepped back from the desk. You're assuming they chose me because of my history. Daniel's eyes held his. They did. You don't know that. I know because they did it to me. The words hung in the workshop, heavy and intimate. For the first time, Marcus noticed the tremor in Daniel's left hand. It was not dramatic, but constant, a fine vibration he had hidden by keeping his palm flat against surfaces. On the desk beside him sat several pill bottles with prescription labels turned away. Marcus realized then that Daniel was not simply a witness. He was a warning. What do you want from me? Marcus asked. Daniel gave a long breath. To finish what I couldn't. And if I go to the police? They'll ask for evidence. You'll show them maps extracted from static, files you accessed after your permissions were compromised, a photograph delivered anonymously, and the word of a former technician removed from duty after a psychological review. Marcus said nothing. That doesn't mean don't go, Daniel added. It means know what you're carrying when you do. A noise came from outside. Both men turned. Not a knock, not a voice, metal scraping faintly against metal near the courtyard gate. Daniel crossed to a monitor on the side table and switched it on. The image was black and white, grainy, divided into 4 camera views. The taxi was gone. The courtyard was empty except for puddles and the closed unit doors. At the gate, the black saloon sat motionless, engine running. One of its rear doors was open. No one was visible. Daniel lowered the volume on the monitor, then reached beneath the desk and removed a small hard drive in a rubber case. He held it out to Marcus. Everything I could verify. Not everything I suspect. There's a difference. Keep it that way. Marcus did not take it immediately. Why give this to me now? Because they already know I have it. They need to know whether you do. That doesn't make me safer. No, Daniel said. It makes you useful. Marcus almost refused. Then the lights went out. The workshop fell into darkness, except for the glow of the security monitor and the pale rectangle of the painted rear windows. Somewhere beyond the steel door, footsteps crossed the courtyard, slow and deliberate, splashing through shallow rainwater. Daniel moved without hesitation. He pressed the hard drive into Marcus's hand and guided him toward the back of the unit. There's an old service passage behind the rear wall, he whispered. It leads under the adjoining workshop and out near the canal path. Marcus gripped the drive. Come with me. Daniel looked toward the front door. For a second, under the monitor's weak light, he looked not like a conspiracist or a vanished technician, but like a man who had spent 8 years in a room with proof and regret, waiting for the cost to arrive. I already had my chance, he said. The steel door at the front began to shake under a heavy, controlled impact. Once, twice, Daniel pushed Marcus behind a shelving unit and pulled aside a sheet of corrugated metal, revealing a narrow black opening in the brickwork. Do not follow the route they show you, Daniel whispered. Albion is bait. Marcus stared at him. What? Before Daniel could answer, the front lock split with a sharp metallic crack. The last thing Marcus saw before crawling into the dark passage was Daniel turning back toward the door, raising both hands into the light of the security monitor, as if surrendering to people who had never intended to arrest him. The passage behind Unit 6 was narrower than Marcus expected. At first, there was no room to stand. He crawled forward on his elbows with the hard drive pressed against his chest inside his jacket. The concrete scraping through the fabric at his knees, the air thick with brick dust and the mineral damp of old foundations. Behind him, through the gap Daniel had opened, came the muffled violence of the workshop door giving way. Then voices, not shouting. That was what made them worse. Calm voices moved through Daniel Vale's room as if the men entering it had done this before. A chair scraped. Something metal hit the floor. Papers shifted in a sudden rush. Marcus froze in the passage, one hand flattened against grit, his breath held so tightly his ribs hurt. He waited for Daniel to speak. He heard nothing. Then the corrugated sheet behind him was moved back into place. Not by Marcus, not from inside the passage, from the workshop side. A final mercy or a final separation. Darkness closed completely. Marcus crawled on. The service passage was not part of any public route. It felt improvised, half forgotten, perhaps once used for utilities between adjoining industrial units and then sealed when the foundry buildings were divided for tenants. Cables hung dead along one wall. Old pipe brackets scratched his shoulder. Twice his sleeve caught on exposed wire, and he had to stop himself from pulling in panic. Panic wasted air. Panic made noise. Panic belonged to the version of him his enemies had already written. He moved slowly, counting not as ritual, but as survival. 10 movements. Pause. Listen. 10 movements. Pause. Listen. The passage angled downward for several yards, then opened into a low brick chamber where he could finally crouch. A faint line of grey light showed through a broken vent near the far wall. Marcus stayed there on one knee, shaking, while dust drifted through the beam like ash. In his jacket, the hard drive felt heavier than its size allowed. Everything I could verify. Not everything I suspect. Daniel's distinction mattered. It was the last clean instruction Marcus had been given. Outside the chamber, the city had entered mourning. He could hear traffic somewhere above or beyond the walls, a bus braking, a gull crying harshly, the distant clatter of metal from a workshop opening nearby. Ordinary sounds reached him, filtered through brick and earth, softened into another world. For the first time, Marcus understood that underground spaces changed more than direction. They changed truth. Above ground, a building had one address, one door, one business name, one version of itself for anyone passing by. Beneath it, walls connected to things no sign admitted. He found the exit where Daniel had said it would be, a warped timber panel behind a stack of discarded pallets in an adjoining storage bay. It took him nearly 5 minutes to shift it without sending the whole pile crashing down. When he finally slipped through, he emerged into a small rear yard cluttered with bins, broken tiles, and a rusted bicycle frame. Beyond a leaning gate lay a narrow service lane leading toward the canal. No one waited there. That absence was not safety. It was an invitation to choose wrong. Marcus stepped into the lane and wiped dust from his face with the cuff of his jacket. His hands were grey. One knuckle had split open. He could feel blood warming the skin beneath the dirt. He looked back once toward the foundry buildings. From this angle, Unit 6 was hidden. The courtyard beyond was silent. He wanted to go back for Daniel. The impulse arrived fiercely and without plan. It was not heroism. It was guilt-seeking movement. Daniel had opened the passage. Daniel had stayed behind. Daniel had lived 8 years with a wall of evidence and the world's disbelief, only to hand it to Marcus at the exact moment danger stopped being theoretical. But going back would not rescue him. It would complete the trap. Marcus turned toward the canal. He walked quickly at first, then slowed when he reached the towpath. A man running with a Labrador passed him without interest. 2 cyclists came by in waterproof jackets, their tires whispering over wet stone. Across the water, converted warehouses stood with expensive windows where old brick had been cleaned and repointed for people who liked industrial character at a safe distance from industrial memory. Marcus sat on a bench and took out the hard drive. It was black, rubber-edged, unmarked, except for a strip of masking tape on the underside. Written in blue pen were 3 words: Veil verified only. His chest tightened. He needed a computer not connected to his home, his work, or any account that could be tied immediately to him. He needed power. He needed time. He needed to know whether Daniel was alive, but every channel through which he might ask the question could expose more than it answered. His phone was at home in a foil-lined biscuit tin. His work access had been poisoned. Alice could be watched through concern, if not surveillance. The police might be necessary, but not yet useful without something ordinary enough to understand. A library, he thought, then rejected it. Cameras, login records, public terminals with restrictions. An internet cafe barely existed anymore in the way old films imagined them. But repair shops, print shops, university facilities, co-working spaces, hotel business corners, those still existed. He needed somewhere anonymous enough for a man to use a machine without becoming memorable. At 0831, he walked into a small, independent print shop near Kirkstall Road and paid cash to use a customer workstation for document formatting. The man behind the counter was busy arguing with a label printer and seemed relieved not to make conversation. Marcus did not connect the hard drive immediately. He first opened a blank document, typed nonsense, saved it, checked where temporary files went, disabled network sharing, confirmed no automatic cloud sync was active under the shop's generic user profile. None of it guaranteed safety, but it turned panic into steps, and steps were something he could manage. Then he plugged in Daniel's drive. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then a single folder appeared. Verified. Inside were subfolders arranged by year. Each contained frames, logs, scans, audio traces, source comparisons, correspondence attempts, and notes written in Daniel's spare technical prose. Marcus opened the most recent folder first. Albion Sequence Current. There were 26 files. He recognized some of the ghost frames, including the one he had captured that night. Daniel had processed them more cleanly, aligning each against public and private sources Marcus had not seen. Some references came from old planning disputes, some from drainage contractor diagrams, some from archived insurance assessments, some from photographs of paper documents taken at angles, perhaps in council reading rooms or solicitors' storage files. Daniel had built each claim like a man expecting hostility from every reader. One composite file showed the apparent route from Holbeck through older utility spaces towards central Leeds. A second overlaid ghost frame symbols with device locations. A third was labeled false route indicators. Marcus opened it. At first it looked like a correction layer. Several paths shown in the ghost frames had been marked in red, crossed out not because they were wrong in the geographic sense, but because Daniel believed they had been deliberately emphasized. A note appeared beside Albion node. Albion sequence not primary entry. Public-facing route for compromised receivers, too visible once decoded. Likely misdirection if intercepted. True route inferred from negative space, what frames avoid showing. Marcus read the note twice. Do not follow the route they show you. Albion is bait. He enlarged the composite and saw what Daniel meant. The ghost frames appeared to lead toward old banking infrastructure under the commercial district, but the areas around that route were described in rich detail, while one corridor of missing information ran consistently along the edge of the mapped zones. Not blank because no data existed, blank because someone had chosen not to transmit it. The absence formed its own line, a hidden approach running beneath service basements, old drainage, and a sealed maintenance spur near the railway arches south of the river. It did not lead directly to a famous bank. It led to a private secure storage facility whose name Marcus had barely noticed in Daniel's annotations. Northridge Custodial Services. The company sounded like accounting furniture. Daniel's file described it as a high-security storage provider for legal documents, private collections, corporate archives, and safe deposit assets transferred from closed bank branches. Beneath its modern reception and reinforced upper floors, according to several old plans, lay a converted vault complex originally built for a banking institution that no longer existed. The Albion route was noisy enough to attract attention. The true route led to Northridge. Marcus felt the investigation tilt under him. The apparent explanation, the one he had been building since the first frame, was incomplete by design. The maps were not merely instructions for the syndicate. They were also a story prepared for anyone clever enough to intercept them. A story about banks, Victorian sewers, and an underground heist. A story dramatic enough to make a frightened compliance monitor sound exactly like what his personnel file would suggest. If Marcus went to the police with Albion, they might dismiss him. If they believed him, they might secure the wrong location. Either way, the real target remained open. He opened another file, Audio Handshake Index. Daniel had catalogued tone bursts embedded in ghost frames and related calls. Each group corresponded not to simple map delivery, but to receiver classes, capture devices, route devices, confirmation devices, and what Daniel labeled watchers. The watcher signals were rare. They appeared whenever someone outside the syndicate began querying or copying frames. Marcus searched the index for the frequency from his voicemail. A match appeared. Watcher confirmation. Active human review. The phrase seemed to lift from the screen and settle around him. His phone had not merely carried a threat, it had confirmed him as an active observer within the network's awareness. After that, everything that had happened, the photograph, the access changes, the duplicate sessions, the calls to Alice, had followed a known containment pattern. Daniel had seen it before. He had survived it. If survival meant vanishing into a workshop with blacked-out windows and hundreds of printed frames for company. Marcus copied the most important files onto a new USB stick he bought from the print shop's display rack. He did not copy everything. Too much evidence could drown a listener faster than too little. He selected the Northridge composite, the audio index, the current Albion sequence, the false route analysis, Daniel's chronology, and 3 files showing clean correspondences between ghost frames and independently verifiable public records. Then he printed 6 pages. Not the strangest ones, the clearest ones. A map overlay, a timeline, a device signal explanation written in Daniel's plainest language. a comparison between broadcast timestamps and known late-night transmission windows, a summary of the difference between Albion and the inferred route toward Northridge. The print shop owner glanced at the pages when collecting them from the printer, saw maps and technical diagrams, and lost interest instantly. "Planning thing, is it?" he asked. "Something like that," Marcus said. He paid cash again. Outside, the sky had lowered into a hard grey ceiling. Rain threatened but had not yet fallen. Marcus placed the USB stick inside his sock, above the ankle, an absurd hiding place that felt more reliable than any bag. He folded the printed pages under his jumper. At 0947, he walked to a public phone box near a row of shops, one of the few still standing because no one had bothered to remove it. The inside smelled of damp plastic and old cigarettes. He used coins and called West Yorkshire Police through the non-emergency number first, then abandoned the queue after 9 minutes when a recorded voice kept thanking him for his patience. He called 999. When the operator answered, Marcus gave his name. His voice sounded steadier than he felt. "I need to report evidence of an imminent organized burglary through underground access routes in Leeds city centre," he said. "The likely target is Northridge Custodial Services. There may also be a false target associated with Albion Street." The operator asked whether the crime was happening now. "No," Marcus said. "I believe it is scheduled for tonight or tomorrow night." She asked how he knew. He closed his eyes. There was no good way through the next sentence. "The information was hidden in unauthorized broadcast signal intrusions," he said. The pause lasted less than a second, but Marcus heard the shift. The call continued professionally. The operator took details. She asked whether he was in immediate danger. He hesitated too long before answering. She asked if he had used drugs or alcohol. He said no. She asked if he had a history of mental health crisis. He understood why she asked. He also understood that the question, once answered truthfully, would begin writing a second report beneath the first. "Yes," he said, "but I am not in crisis." The statement sounded weaker than it was. By the end of the call, he had been advised to attend a police station with any evidence and, if he felt unsafe, to remain in a public place. No urgent unit was dispatched. No alarm was raised around Northridge that he could see. The machinery of public safety had received his warning and placed it in a category built for people who sounded like him. Marcus left the phone box feeling both foolish and vindicated, which was a dangerous combination. At 10:22, Alice called his work phone. The number appeared on the small device he had forgotten was still in his tote bag. He stared at it, then answered. "Where are you?" she asked. "In town." "I found more notes from that old call. Marcus, he mentioned a name, Northridge. I didn't remember until I saw it written down." Marcus stopped walking. "Alice, listen to me. Do not say that name again on this phone." "What?" "Just listen. Are you at home?" "Yes." "Stay there. Don't talk to anyone from my work. If police contact you, tell the truth, but don't volunteer anything over the phone unless you know who you're speaking to." She was quiet for a moment. "You sound different. How?" "Like you've stopped trying to convince me." Marcus looked across the street at an office building where workers moved behind glass, holding coffee, laughing, beginning their day in a city whose foundations were being used as a weapon. "I think convincing people is the trap," he said. After the call, he went to Northridge. He did not approach the entrance directly. The facility occupied a converted stone building on a side street near the commercial district, its facade cleaned and discreet, with frosted glass doors, black security cameras, and a brass plaque so understated it seemed designed for clients who preferred not to be seen entering. Beside it stood a newer office block. Behind it, service access descended toward a gated loading bay. Marcus watched from across the road under the awning of a closed cafe. Nothing obvious happened. Couriers came and went. A woman in a tailored coat entered after presenting a card. A security guard stepped outside to smoke and checked his phone with board efficiency. A white maintenance van pulled into the service bay at 11:06 and left 11 minutes later. Marcus wrote the registration number down. At 11:31, another van arrived. Same company logo, different registration. The driver used the same access code without speaking to the guard. That might mean nothing. Contractors often shared codes. Buildings had routines. The world was full of ordinary explanations. and Marcus had to keep respecting that or become useless. Then the second van reversed into the bay, and for one brief moment, before the shutter lowered, Marcus saw the driver through the side mirror. It was the hooded figure from Archive Terminal B. Not clearly, not enough for a courtroom, but enough for the body, which recognized danger before reason wrote its objection. Marcus stepped back into the cafe doorway. The shutter closed. His work phone vibrated. A text message appeared from an unknown number. "Police will not reach the right door." A second message followed. "Neither will you." Marcus looked up from the screen. Across the road, on the second floor of the office block beside Northridge, someone stood behind a window watching him. The figure lifted one hand slowly and pointed down. Not at the street, at the ground beneath Marcus's feet. The gesture lasted only a second. The figure behind the second floor glass lifted one hand, pointed downward, and then stepped back into the grey interior of the office block until reflection swallowed them. Marcus remained beneath the cafe awning with the work phone in his hand and the message still glowing on the screen. "Police will not reach the right door, neither will you." Rain began in a fine mist, almost too light to hear. It gathered on the pavement, on the black window frames of Northridge Custodial Services, on the brass plaque beside the frosted entrance. Office workers moved past with collars turned up, no one looking at the man standing too still outside a closed cafe. Behind the service bay, the shutter remained down. Marcus forced himself to lower the phone. Down. The pointing hand had not meant the building. It had meant beneath him, beneath the awning, beneath the pavement, beneath the old commercial street that looked from above as if it had been modernized into safety. He stepped away from the cafe and looked at the ground. There was nothing remarkable there. Stone slabs darkened by weather, a chewing gum stain flattened into the surface, a utility cover with a telecommunications company mark, a drain at the curb. The everyday skin of a British city walked over by thousands who never considered what lay below. But Marcus had spent the last 2 days learning that ordinary surfaces could carry extraordinary instructions. He crossed the road when the light changed, keeping his face turned away from the office block window. Near Northridge's service entrance, the loading bay shutter hummed faintly. Not moving, just powered. Alive. A camera above the bay adjusted with a soft mechanical twitch, following a courier van farther up the street, then returning to its rest position. Marcus did not stop. He passed the bay, continued to the end of the building, and turned into a narrow side lane where bins stood in pairs and rainwater dripped from old stone ledges. The city's sound changed in the lane, traffic became muffled, footsteps echoed differently. The gap between buildings held a smell of wet cardboard, engine oil, and something older, mineral and sour, rising through drains. At the far end, a delivery door served the neighboring office block. A keypad glowed beside it. Above the keypad was a small sign for a facilities company whose name meant nothing to Marcus. Below, half hidden by a warped rubber mat, was a rectangular iron cover marked with old lettering worn nearly smooth. He crouched. The letters were not from the modern utility grid. They were older, cast in a typeface softened by decades of use. City drainage. His pulse quickened. The cover itself was ordinary enough. Cities were full of old covers. Most led nowhere useful, or nowhere safe, or nowhere accessible without tools and permits. But Daniel's false route analysis had shown a line of negative space running near the railway arches, across older drainage infrastructure, and toward the service basements behind Northridge. The frames avoided naming the true approach because any named route could be compromised if intercepted. The hidden route was not what the maps showed. It was what they refused to show. Marcus stood before anyone could notice him crouching too long beside a drain cover. He walked back into the main street and continued 2 blocks until he found a small public square with benches, a coffee kiosk, and enough people to make him less conspicuous. He sat with his back to a wall and opened Daniel's printed pages under the shelter of his coat. He no longer tried to understand every file. That had been his mistake. The evidence was too large, too strange, too easily made to look like obsession if presented whole. He needed the shape. Holbeck Intercept, Kirkgate South, Albion Node, Northridge, false route indicators, watcher confirmation. He arranged the pages across his knees, shielding them from rain. The city map from the petrol station lay beneath them. In pen, he drew what he knew. Not the tunnels exactly, because those were uncertain, but the logic of movement. The ghost frames described one route loudly. Old municipal tunnels leading toward a recognizable cluster of banks and vaults around Albion Street. That route contained enough truth to be persuasive. It included real tunnels, real access points, real underground chambers. It was not fake in the childish sense. It was bait made from real pieces. The missing corridor curved away from the obvious target. It used service spaces that did not appear together on any single public plan. A drainage spur, a basement connection, a sealed maintenance void, an old delivery access beneath a building whose ownership had changed so many times no one institution held the full record. It led not to a high street bank, but to Northridge Custodial Services, where valuable things had been moved precisely because old banks had closed. That was the elegance of it. People protected the institutions they recognized. They did not always protect the afterlife of those institutions. The storage companies, private archives, legal vaults, document custodians, asset handlers. Quiet firms that inherited what the public no longer saw. Marcus looked up from the pages. A woman in a beige coat walked a small terrier past the square. A council worker emptied a bin. A man under a black umbrella spoke angrily into a phone about a delayed meeting. The city performed itself in daylight, unaware of the second city moving beneath it. He checked the time, 12:18. His next full graveyard shift was scheduled for that night, unless the rota change still stood. But whether he was officially working or not might no longer matter. The operation's timing had been built around the broadcast window, and the next final instruction had not yet aired. Daniel had believed the decisive ghost frame would arrive during the next low-audience block. Marcus needed that frame. The police needed something more ordinary than maps in static. A van, a face, a location, a time, a connection between the broadcast intrusion and Northridge. He had seen the hooded figure from Archive Terminal B driving a maintenance van into the service bay. But seen was not proof. Recognition was not evidence. His word was already weakened. He needed the missing proof. He took out the old digital camera from his tote bag. It had survived the crawl through Daniel's passage with only a scratch on its casing. He reviewed the photographs stored on it, the message on his locked workstation, the latest ghost frame, the Albion map, Daniel's wall in Unit 6, captured quickly in the moments before the lights died. The images were grainy, uneven, and imperfect, but they existed outside the network. That mattered. The camera also showed one photograph Marcus did not remember taking. At first he thought it was accidental, a blurred image of the workshop floor. Then he zoomed in. It was the lower corner of Daniel's evidence wall. A strip of paper had been pinned there beneath several route diagrams. Marcus had missed it in the room. The camera, held low and hurried, had caught only part of the note. Final burst must use main tower. Local receivers need simultaneous sync. If jammed, route team blind below. Marcus stared at the tiny camera screen. There it was. Not all of it, not enough, but the principle had surfaced. The ghost frames did not merely provide maps. They synchronized devices across the route. The team moving below depended on brief, precise signal bursts from the broadcast network. Without them, they could still move, perhaps, but blind to timing, door status, checkpoint confirmation, and changes in path. The invisible system that guided them could be disrupted from the same place it was being abused. The broadcast center. His controlled world had not simply been the site of the intrusion, it was the instrument. Marcus closed his eyes and saw Control Suite 3, the monitor wall, the playout chain, the emergency override system, the transmission mast blinking red over the industrial estate. He knew the safeguards, he knew the procedures, he also knew the consequences of interfering with a live broadcast signal without authorization. Fines, criminal investigation, dismissal, potential disruption across regional feeds. Emergency protocols triggered if mishandled. To stop the syndicate, he might have to become the unauthorized intruder. A faint laugh escaped him, not from amusement but from the bitter symmetry of it. His work phone vibrated again. This time the number was visible. Alice. He answered. Marcus, she said, there are police here. He sat up sharply. At your house? Yes. 2 officers. They say they're doing a welfare check because your employer reported concern and because of a call you made. Marcus pressed his free hand against the wall behind him. Are they real police? I checked their IDs. I think so. Don't give them anything I told you about Northridge over the phone. I already told them you were frightened and that someone had taken a photograph of you. That's fine. One of them wants to speak to you. Before Marcus could refuse, a male voice came on the line. Calm, professional, Yorkshire accent. Mr. Thorne, this is Sergeant Ellis with West Yorkshire Police. Your sister is concerned for you. Your workplace is also concerned. We understand you believe there may be a planned burglary. Marcus looked around the square. No one seemed to be watching him, which meant little now. There is a planned burglary, Marcus said, but the obvious route is false. The target is Northridge Custodial Services. There are maintenance vans entering the service bay. One driver is linked to unauthorized access at my workplace. Where are you now? Marcus did not answer. Sergeant Ellis waited a moment. Mr. Thorne, you called emergency services earlier and described information hidden in television broadcasts. I need to understand whether you are safe and whether anyone else is in immediate danger. Both can be true, Marcus said. What can? I can have a psychiatric history, and this can still be happening. The line went quiet. When Ellis spoke again, his voice was slower, not patronizing exactly, but arranged for someone standing near an edge. That is possible, he said, but I need evidence we can act on. Marcus almost ended the call. He almost walked away from the square, from Alice's fear, from the officer's cautious tone, from the unbearable work of being believed by inches. Instead, he made himself ask one clean question. If I bring physical documents, photographs, a drive, and a specific location, will you look at them before classifying this as a mental health incident? Sergeant Ellis did not answer immediately. Yes, he said at last, I will look at them. Personally, yes. Not at my workplace, not through my employer. All right. Marcus chose quickly. A police station felt too exposed, too easy for the story to be absorbed into procedure before Ellis saw the shape. Northridge was dangerous. His flat was impossible. Daniel's workshop might already be stripped. Leeds Central Library, Marcus said. Reference floor, public place, 1 hour. Ellis paused. You'll meet me there? Yes. Do not put yourself at risk before then. Marcus looked toward the direction of Northridge, hidden behind city blocks and rain. I'm already late for that, he said, and ended the call. He stayed seated for another 5 minutes, scanning the square in reflections. Cafe glass, bus shelter panels, dark windows, no black saloon, no hooded figure, no obvious watcher. Then he gathered the pages and walked toward the library. Leeds Central Library stood with the grave confidence of Victorian civic architecture, all stone, arches, carved detail, and heavy doors. Inside, warmth and quiet wrapped around him. The building smelled of paper, polish, damp coats, and the faint metallic scent of old radiators. People worked at long tables under soft lights. A pensioner read newspapers. A student highlighted textbooks. 2 tourists whispered over a guidebook. Marcus chose a table on the reference floor with sightlines to the stairs and lift. He placed Daniel's printed pages inside a local history volume so they would look like research notes. The hard drive remained hidden in his sock. The USB stick was in his coat lining. The camera sat beneath his hand. At 13:31, Sergeant Ellis arrived. He was in plain clothes, early 40s, compact build, tired eyes, no dramatic presence. He showed his warrant card without Marcus asking. That small courtesy mattered more than he probably knew. I came alone, Ellis said quietly, sitting opposite him. For now. Marcus nodded. I need you to understand, Ellis continued, that if I think you're at risk of harming yourself or someone else, I have duties. I know. But I said I'd look. Marcus opened the book. For the next 20 minutes, he did not try to tell the whole story. He showed Ellis the photograph from his flat first, then the image of the locked workstation message, then the captured ghost frame, then Daniel's false route overlay, then the Northridge connection, then the van registrations he had written down from the service bay. Ellis asked short questions. Where did this file come from? Who is Daniel Vale? Can any map element be independently verified? What links the broadcast center to the vans? What time do you believe this will happen? Marcus answered only what he knew. When he suspected, he said suspected. When he inferred, he said inferred. When he could not prove something, he said he could not prove it. That discipline changed the room. Ellis stopped watching Marcus as a potential crisis and began watching the pages as a potential problem. At 13:58, the sergeant photographed the van registrations with his phone and sent a message. At 14:03, he sent another. At 14:11, he received a reply that made his expression harden. One of those vans was reported stolen 3 days ago, Ellis said. Marcus felt something loosen and tighten at the same time. Which one? The second. The driver entered Northridge's service bay using a code. Ellis looked toward the library windows, beyond which the city moved under rain. That gets my attention. For the first time in 2 days, Marcus felt belief enter the air between him and another person. It did not feel triumphant. It felt fragile and late. Ellis gathered the pages carefully. I'm going to make calls, quietly. I can't promise anything yet. Do you have the digital files? Marcus hesitated. The hard drive in his sock seemed suddenly ridiculous and vital. Before he could answer, the old digital camera beneath his hand beeped. Not loudly, a small electronic chirp. The screen turned on by itself. Marcus looked down. A new image had appeared in playback mode. It was not one he had taken. It showed Control Suite 3, live, empty. On the central monitor, a countdown clock was running. 02 o'clock, Zuku, 01:59:59, 01:59:58. Beneath the image, in white text, someone had added a caption, Final frame tonight. Sergeant Ellis saw the image before Marcus could hide it. For a moment, both men sat motionless at the reference table, while the library continued around them in soft, disciplined quiet. Somewhere beyond the shelves, a page turned. A chair leg whispered against the floor. Rain tapped lightly against the tall windows of Leeds Central Library, blurring the view of the street outside into grey stone, umbrellas, and passing buses. On the camera's small screen, Control Suite 3 appeared in a grainy live image. Empty chairs, monitor glow. The compliance desk, Marcus's white mug still sitting where someone had moved it. And on the central screen, the countdown. 01:59:42, 01:59:41, 01:59:40. Final frame, tonight. Ellis leaned closer, but did not touch the camera. His expression had changed completely. The careful distance of a police officer assessing a distressed caller was gone. In its place was something harder, sharper, and more practical. Is that your workplace? He asked. Yes. Is this live? I don't know. Could it be a recording? Yes. Marcus forced himself to answer without defensiveness. It could be, but the countdown suggests a scheduled transmission event. Ellis looked at him. How did that image get onto your camera? It shouldn't be possible. That isn't an answer. No, Marcus said, but it's the honest one. Ellis sat back, already reaching for his phone. He kept his voice low, almost conversational, but Marcus heard the urgency beneath it. I need you to stay here. I can't. You can. The final frame will go through the broadcast center. If it synchronizes their receivers, the team below gets its route confirmation. Daniel's notes say if the signal is jammed, the route team is blind. Ellis's eyes flicked toward the pages spread inside the book. You're not going into your workplace and interfering with a broadcast transmission. Marcus looked down at the camera. 01:58:11, 01:58:10. He felt no surge of courage, no cinematic certainty, only the cold narrowing of choices. 2 days earlier, his world had been a sequence of screens, logs, shift patterns, and small routines strong enough to hold him together. Now every routine had become a handle someone else could pull. The system had been used to isolate him, discredit him, direct him, bait him, and finally summon him. That was what the countdown was. Not merely information, a lure. Daniel's words returned with the smell of dust and warm electronics. Do not follow the route they show you. Albion is bait. Marcus closed the camera screen. Ellis noticed. What are you thinking? That they want me to rush back to the center? Good, then don't. But the signal still matters. Ellis's phone vibrated before he could answer. He read the message, then stood. The stolen van is still inside Northridge's service bay, according to CCTV from the council camera at the junction. Another unit is being contacted. Quietly, I'm not promising a raid based on this yet, but it's moving. Marcus stood too. What about the broadcast center? I'll request a unit there as well. Uniforms? For now. That may warn whoever is inside. Ellis gave him a look. And you breaking in won't? Marcus had no answer that sounded sane. The sergeant stepped away to make a call near the tall windows. Marcus watched him speak in a low voice, one hand covering the phone as if the old library itself were listening. There was something almost absurdly comforting about Ellis's ordinary caution. He did not believe everything. He did not understand enough. But he had not laughed. He had not asked whether Marcus had taken his medication. He had not folded the evidence back into concern before looking at it. That fragile belief was the first real ally Marcus had found among the living, and yet it might not be enough. Marcus opened Daniel's printed chronology again. He traced the timestamps. Each ghost frame appeared during a narrow window, embedded in low audience archive content, often following an audio handshake. The final burst, according to the cropped note, had to use the main tower. Local receivers needed simultaneous sync. If jammed, route team blind below. The word main mattered. The syndicate did not need the compliance suite specifically. It needed access to the broadcast path before regional distribution and after ordinary content scheduling. Control Suite 3 was where Marcus could see it, but the physical signal override sat deeper in the center's emergency routing chain, protected by procedures designed for civil alerts, equipment failure, and severe public safety interruptions. Marcus had trained on it twice, once during a flood alert exercise, once during a simulated transmitter fault. He knew enough to cause disruption. That knowledge frightened him. Ellis returned. I have a plainclothes unit heading toward Northridge. Another car will check your workplace from outside. I need the digital files now. Marcus hesitated. The hard drive, Ellis said. You have it. Marcus looked at him. You keep touching your left ankle, Ellis said, and earlier you wouldn't answer when I asked if you had the files. Despite everything, Marcus almost smiled. You are paying attention. It's my job. Marcus sat, removed the hard drive from his sock, and placed it on the table between them. The gesture felt like surrendering a piece of Daniel Vale's life to an institution that had failed him once already. Ellis understood enough not to grab it. What's on it? Everything Daniel could verify. Where is Daniel now? Marcus did not answer quickly. The question opened the image of Unit 6, the lights dying, the steel door shaking, Daniel turning back with his hands raised in the glow of the security monitor. I don't know, Marcus said. He stayed behind. Ellis placed the drive inside an evidence bag from his coat pocket. Then we also need to check that workshop. They may have cleared it already. Probably. That single word, practical and grim, made Marcus trust him a little more. Then the old digital camera chirped again. Ellis's hand went still over the evidence bag. Marcus opened the screen. The view had changed. No longer Control Suite 3. Now it showed a corridor inside the broadcast center. A service corridor Marcus recognized from the lower level near Archive Terminal B. The image was angled from a ceiling camera. At the far end, a figure in a dark hooded jacket walked toward the archive room carrying a black equipment case. The timestamp in the corner was live. Ellis leaned in. Can you identify him? No. Is that the person from the van? Yes, I think so. The hooded figure stopped outside Archive B and looked up toward the camera. Then the feed cut to black. A new caption appeared. 1 hour 43. Marcus looked at Ellis. They know I'm with you. Ellis took the camera from the table carefully, holding it by the edges. Or they want you to think that. They sent a live internal camera feed to a disconnected company camera. Was it disconnected? Marcus opened his mouth and stopped. The old camera had never been network connected by design. But after Daniel's workshop, after the lights, after the passage, after the print shop, could he swear no one had touched it? Could he swear the device had not been modified before he took it from the equipment drawer? Could he swear anything that had passed through the broadcast center remained clean? No. The answer was no. That was the new terror. The problem was not simply that someone could lie, it was that every object now carried the possibility of having already been turned into part of someone else's sentence. Ellis put the camera into another bag. "We're leaving." "Where?" "Somewhere I control." They left the reference floor separately, but within sight of each other. Ellis went first, descending the stairs with the calm pace of a man unwilling to advertise alarm. Marcus followed after 30 seconds, carrying only the printed pages concealed inside the local history volume. The library's warmth gave way to the colder echo of the entrance hall, then the wet breath of the city outside. A marked police car was not waiting. That would have been too visible. Instead, Ellis guided Marcus to a plain grey hatchback parked on a side street. As they approached, the sergeant scanned the road without theatrics. Marcus scanned windows, mirrors, parked cars, faces under umbrellas. Once, he caught himself counting every third paving stone and stopped with a physical effort. Ellis noticed, but said nothing. That too was a form of kindness. They drove without sirens through the city centre. Leeds moved around them in its ordinary afternoon rhythm. Buses pulling from stops, office workers crossing against the lights, delivery riders bending against rain, cranes fixed against the low sky. Marcus watched building fronts pass and imagined their basements, their old service corridors, their sealed doors, their forgotten voids. "Tell me about the emergency override," Ellis said. Marcus turned from the window. "What?" "You said the signal could be jammed from the broadcast center. Explain it like I've never seen your equipment." "It isn't a jammer in the criminal sense. The tower can transmit controlled interruption signals, emergency routing, test slates, alert tones, backup feeds. If someone inserted a synchronization burst into the normal transmission path, an override could mask or corrupt it." "Could that affect public broadcasts?" "Yes." "How badly?" "Depends how it's done." "And you know how to do it?" Marcus looked down at his hands. "Enough to make people angry." "That isn't what I asked." "Yes," Marcus said. "I know how." Ellis was silent for several seconds. "Could someone else do it legally?" "With the right authority, yes, but they would need to believe the signal itself is part of the crime, and they would need to act before the final frame airs. Most broadcast engineers would refuse without written authorization. Most police officers wouldn't know what they were asking for. Could I get that authorization?" "Not in under 2 hours." The car stopped at a red light near a row of shops. Rain gathered on the windscreen, and the wipers dragged it away in steady arcs. Ellis looked straight ahead. "Then we have a problem." Marcus almost said, "I know." Instead, he watched an elderly man cross the street with a shopping bag in each hand, moving carefully between puddles, trusting the city to remain the version he understood. They did not go to a police station. Ellis drove to a small municipal building used by neighborhood policing and council safety teams, a brick structure beside a community health center, unremarkable enough not to draw attention. Inside, a reception officer looked surprised to see Ellis, but said nothing when he asked for a side room. Marcus was brought into a small interview space with beige walls, a table bolted to the floor, 2 plastic chairs, and a kettle on a side counter that had not been cleaned well. It was not dramatic. That helped. Ellis made 2 more calls. Marcus heard fragments through the closed door: stolen vehicle, possible commercial burglary, technical evidence, do not approach from Albion, check service bay, need contact at broadcaster not through standard supervisor chain. When Ellis returned, he was holding a notepad filled with names. "I've got someone at Northridge Management being contacted through a vetted line," he said, slowly. "I've also asked for Daniel Vale's workshop to be checked, and I'm trying to reach someone senior at your broadcast center who is not your supervisor." Marcus laughed once, quietly. Ellis frowned. "What?" "That might be the hardest part." Before Ellis could reply, his phone rang. He answered, listened, and his expression changed. "What do you mean, empty?" he said. Marcus looked up. Ellis listened longer. "No, preserve it. Don't let the landlord in. Photograph everything. I want CCTV from the lane and the courtyard." He ended the call. "Unit 6? Marcus asked. "Cleared?" "How cleared?" "No papers, no equipment, no Daniel Vale." The room seemed to recede from Marcus. Ellis continued, voice controlled. "There are marks on the floor suggesting heavy racks were moved recently. Neighbor heard noise, but thought it was a workshop delivery. No sign of assault, no obvious blood. No obvious blood. The phrase was meant to comfort and failed. Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table, and pressed his fingers together until the pressure steadied him. Daniel had existed. The wall had existed. The evidence had existed. Some of it now lay in an evidence bag with Ellis. Some of it remained on a USB stick hidden in Marcus's coat lining. Some of it had been photographed by a camera that might itself be compromised. The room's fluorescent light buzzed faintly. At 15:27, Ellis received confirmation that Northridge's management had reported no security concerns, but acknowledged a maintenance visit scheduled for that morning. The contractor company, when contacted, denied sending any van that day. The access code used at the service bay belonged to a facilities subcontractor who had stopped working for Northridge 6 months earlier. That was the first piece of evidence that belonged fully to the ordinary world. Ellis wrote it down and underlined it twice. At 15:43, a plainclothes officer near Northridge reported that the stolen van remained inside the loading bay, but could not be approached without alerting building security and possibly whoever was inside. A second vehicle, the white van Marcus had seen earlier, had left the area and was being traced through traffic cameras. At 16:02, the broadcast center returned Ellis's call through a senior compliance manager named Fiona Greaves, whom Marcus had met only twice. She was cautious, irritated, and audibly resistant to the suggestion that police might require immediate access to emergency routing systems based on information from Marcus Thorne. Ellis put her on speaker after warning Marcus not to interrupt. "We have no evidence of malicious signal insertion," Fiona said. "We do, however, have an employee who has demonstrated concerning behavior around archive material and unauthorized access attempts." Marcus closed his eyes. Ellis looked at him, then spoke evenly. "The employee has provided evidence connected to a stolen van currently inside a secure storage facility's loading bay." "That may be so," Fiona said, "but that has nothing to do with our transmission chain. Can you confirm whether any unusual frame-level activity is scheduled or has been detected tonight between 0200 and 0300? Our systems do not schedule unusual activity, Sergeant." "Can you check?" A pause. "I can request a review." "I need it now. With respect, you are asking for immediate technical intervention in a regulated broadcast environment without demonstrating a broadcast fault." Marcus opened his eyes. The trap had returned to its original form. Procedure, liability, institutional caution, not evil, not even stupidity, just a structure moving too slowly around a threat designed to exploit slowness. Ellis kept his voice flat. "If your transmission system is being used to coordinate a crime, delay helps the offenders. And if we interrupt broadcast operations without cause, we create risk, breach regulation, and potentially compromise public alert systems." Both statements were true. That was the horror of it. After the call end, Ellis stood with one hand on the back of his chair. "She's escalating internally. She won't get there in time. You don't know that." Marcus looked at the wall clock, 16:18. The final frame, if the countdown was real, would arrive around 15:31 plus 2 hours. No. He corrected himself. The image had appeared earlier in the library with a 2-hour countdown. But the caption had shifted to 1 hour 43 at around 13:48 on the camera feed. It was not counting toward afternoon. It was demonstrating timing offset. Or it was false, or it was bait. He took a breath. "Wait," he said. Ellis turned. "What?" "The countdown doesn't match tonight's 0200 window, if read literally. It was never showing hours until broadcast. It was showing the interval between root devices." Ellis stared at him. "Explain." Marcus pulled the printed timeline toward him. "The final broadcast is tonight, but the countdown image may be showing internal synchronization stages. 1 hour 59 between the first device check and the next. Then 1 hour 43 when the archive camera appeared. These aren't countdowns to the crime. They're proof the root devices are already cycling. So the operation may already be underway." "Yes." The words changed the room more completely than any alarm. Ellis reached for his phone. Before he could dial, the municipal building lights flickered. Once, twice. The kettle clicked off on the side counter, though no one had touched it. Then every phone in the room, Ellis's mobile, the desk handset, and the old work phone in Marcus's tote bag began vibrating or ringing at the same time. Ellis answered his first. Marcus answered nothing. From the work phone speaker, a thin electronic tone leaked into the room, so high it was almost imagined. Ellis listened to his caller for 3 seconds, then went pale. "The Northridge fire alarm just activated," he said. Marcus looked down at his own ringing phone. The screen displayed no number, only a message, "Route team below." Then a second line appeared. "Thank you for following Albion." For 1 second, Marcus did not understand the words on the screen. "Route team below. Thank you for following Albion." Then understanding arrived with such force that the small municipal interview room seemed to tilt around him. The beige walls, the bolted table, the kettle, the cheap chairs. Sergeant Ellis, standing pale beneath the fluorescent light, all of it sharpened into cruel clarity. Albion had not only been bait on the maps. Albion had been bait for him. Every warning, every frame, every carefully revealed contradiction had pulled Marcus along a path that felt like resistance. Daniel Vale's notes, the hidden route, Northridge, the stolen van, the service bay, the false route analysis, the message telling him police would not reach the right door. Even the pointing figure at the window, directing his attention downward, had not been a mistake. It had been steering. Marcus had believed he was stepping away from the obvious trap. Instead, he had been following the deeper one. Ellis was already moving. His voice cut through the room, controlled but urgent, speaking into his phone. "I need units at Northridge now. Fire alarm activation may be diversionary. Confirm evacuation status. Do not assume the threat is above ground. Check basements and service access. Repeat, basements and service access." Marcus barely heard him. On the work phone, the thin tone continued, pulsing beneath the text. He stared at the screen, suddenly aware that he had carried the device into the room, into the meeting with Ellis, into the place where the evidence was being gathered. The phone had been forgotten, then used, not by him, through him. A watcher confirmation, active human review. No, worse than that. A relay. He snatched the phone from the table and powered it off. The screen went black, but the tone seemed to remain in the bones of the room for another second, as if the building itself had heard it. Ellis ended one call and began another. "We need technical support on signal interference. No, not later, now." He listened, jaw tight. "Then wake someone who can authorize it." Marcus looked at the hard drive evidence bag on the side counter. Daniel's verified files were safe, at least in the narrow sense. But safety had become a poor word. The evidence had been useful, perhaps deliberately useful. It had given Ellis enough to act, but perhaps not enough to act in the right place at the right time. The syndicate had not needed to hide every truth. They had hidden the order of truths. That was the betrayal. Not Daniel's, perhaps. Not fully, but somewhere inside the chain of warnings and files, Marcus had been given just enough certainty to move with confidence in the wrong direction. Ellis turned back to him. "Northridge is evacuating. Alarm panel shows activation in lower service level. No visible fire yet." "That's not the target," Marcus said. Ellis stopped. "You said it was." "I was meant to." The words came out quietly. Ellis stared at him, and Marcus saw the old doubt trying to return, not because Ellis wanted to doubt him, but because every new reversal asked too much of belief. Marcus forced himself to remain steady. "The message says thank you for following Albion. They wanted us to focus on Northridge. They wanted police and building security drawn there." "Then where?" Marcus turned toward the printed maps on the table. His hands moved before his mind fully formed the answer. Holbeck, Kirkgate, Albion, Northridge, false route, negative space. Route devices, fire alarm, broadcast synchronization. He rearranged the pages not as Daniel had arranged them, but as the syndicate might have expected a cautious observer to read them. If Northridge was a diversion, it still served a purpose. A fire alarm would empty the building, draw responders, trigger security overrides, occupy police attention, and create traffic disruption in surrounding streets. The route team below might not be entering Northridge to steal from it. They might be passing beneath it while everyone watched its doors. He traced the missing corridor beyond Northridge, extending it not toward the storage facility but past it, under the old service alignment toward the river. Then northwest under a commercial block marked on Daniel's older maps, but not highlighted in the current files. Marcus's finger stopped on a small label from an old insurance survey. Merion Exchange Subvault. It was not a bank now. It had not been one for decades. The building above had been subdivided, renamed, refurbished, leased to firms whose signs changed every few years. But the subvault had once served as a secure transfer point between financial institutions, a place where cash, bearer bonds, deeds, and legal packets moved without public visibility. Modern records suggested it had been sealed, but Daniel's older scans showed service access continuing through neighboring basements. Here, Marcus said. Ellis leaned over the map. What is that? A forgotten vault connection, not a public bank, not Northridge, something older. What's in it now? I don't know. That's not enough. No, Marcus said, but look at the route. Northridge alarm draws units here. Albion draws attention here. The actual corridor continues past both. If their team is below, they don't need to come up where alarms are ringing. They move while everyone above is reacting. Ellis looked at the map, then at the clock, then at his phone. His face had the strained stillness of a man deciding which uncertainty to serve first. A call came through. He answered on speaker. A woman's voice spoke over background noise. Sergeant, Northridge evacuation underway. Staff accounted for on upper floors. Basement security door shows open status, but facilities claim it should be locked. Fire service en route. Ellis looked at Marcus. Marcus shook his head. They opened it from below, or made it look opened. It keeps everyone there. Ellis spoke into the phone. Hold outer perimeter. Do not send anyone into lower service routes without backup and breathing equipment. I need a second team toward Merion Exchange, old subvault access, commercial block north of the river. I'm sending location. The woman hesitated. On what basis? Ellis looked at the pages again. On my authority, he said. The words were simple. They cost him something. Marcus heard it. For the first time, someone inside the official world was risking his own credibility on the possibility that Marcus was right. That should have brought relief. Instead, it deepened the weight in Marcus's chest, because being believed meant there was no longer anywhere to hide from the consequences. Ellis ended the call. We still need the signal stopped. Marcus looked toward the black screen of the powered-off work phone. They may already have what they need. May is not good enough. No. Can the broadcast center still disrupt the next synchronization burst? If it hasn't gone out, yes. If their devices are cycling, the final confirmation might still depend on the late-night transmission window, or they may be using repeated smaller bursts through compromised feeds. Can you stop those from here? Marcus almost said no. Then he remembered something from the old Daniel files. Main tower, simultaneous sync, local receivers. The syndicate depended on trust in the ordinary signal. To corrupt that trust did not require perfect access to the system. It required sending enough controlled noise into the same path at the same time. A crude override might not stop all communication, but it could distort the handshake, flood receiver timing, and make root devices disagree. Not elegant, possibly illegal, potentially dangerous, but possible. I need access to the emergency routing console, Marcus said. Ellis's expression hardened. At the broadcast center. Yes. You told me they want you there. They do. So we don't go. If we don't, the signal remains clean. Ellis stepped closer, lowering his voice. You are not bait we have to use. The sentence struck Marcus with unexpected force. For 2 days, he had been treated as a liability, a symptom, a tool, a watcher, a trigger. No one had said that plainly before. You are not bait we have to use. He wanted to believe it. But in the same moment, the old machinery in his mind offered a counter-argument colder than fear. Useful was not the same as valued. Necessary was not the same as safe. And sometimes refusing to be bait simply meant letting other people fall into the trap unopposed. I know the system, Marcus said. Whoever is inside knows enough to abuse it. Fiona Greaves will take too long to authorize anything. Martin will block me. The police don't know the console. Daniel is gone. That leaves me. Ellis held his gaze. And if this is exactly the ending they wrote for you... Marcus looked at the maps, the phone, the evidence bags, the clock. Then I'll have to edit it. The line sounded braver than he felt, and he disliked himself a little for saying it. But Ellis did not smile. He simply nodded once, as if accepting that courage often arrived wearing poor language. They left the municipal building 5 minutes later. This time, Ellis did not ask Marcus to stay behind. He drove fast, but without sirens, using side streets where possible, making calls through a hands-free unit, while Marcus watched the city shift toward evening. Rain thickened against the windscreen. Headlights came on early. Office workers moved in hurried clusters. Somewhere in the city centre, Northridge was emptying into the street under a false alarm, or a real breach, or some mixture designed to blur both. Ellis relayed the Merion Exchange location to a second unit. He asked for technical crimes support. He asked for contact with a senior broadcast regulator. He asked for power network liaison in case the syndicate attempted another localized disruption. Each request met friction: questions, authority, availability, procedure. Marcus listened and understood, perhaps for the first time, that institutions were not slow because no one cared. They were slow because every action needed a box to fit into, and the ghost frames had been designed between boxes. At 17:06, they reached the industrial estate near the broadcast center. The transmission mast rose behind the low concrete building, red beacons blinking in the wet dusk. The sight of it hit Marcus with the intimacy of a place he had mistaken for neutral. For years, the mast had been background, infrastructure, a tool. Now it looked like a needle threaded through the city's hidden skin. Ellis parked 2 streets away. A marked unit had been told to remain out of sight until called. Another plainclothes officer waited near the estate entrance. But the broadcast center itself appeared normal. Staff cars in the lot. Security lights on. No alarm. No visible panic. That normality felt rehearsed. Marcus had no active access, or at least none he trusted. Ellis had police authority, but not enough to storm a regulated broadcast facility without clearer grounds. They needed a reason to enter that did not alert the inside man too early. Then Marcus saw Priya Nair. She was standing near the side smoking area under a small shelter, though Marcus had never known her to smoke. She wore a dark coat over office clothes and held a paper cup untouched in both hands. Her hair was tied back against the rain. She looked toward the car park, then toward the road, then down at her cup. Waiting. Marcus felt a cautious hope. I emailed her, he said. Ellis followed his gaze. Who? Priya Nair, infrastructure liaison. She may know something. Can we trust her? Marcus watched Priya look once toward the security cameras, then turn her body slightly so the shelter blocked part of her from view. I don't know, he said, but she's standing where she wouldn't stand unless she wanted to be seen by someone outside. Ellis considered, then nodded. Stay close. They approached on foot through the rain. Priya saw Marcus first. Her face showed relief, then anger, then fear she tried to hide by tightening her grip on the cup. Where the hell have you been? She whispered, trying to stay believable. She looked at Ellis. Sergeant Ellis, he said, showing his warrant card discreetly. We need to speak quickly. Priya swallowed. They're not here. She led them behind the smoking shelter to a service recess, partially shielded by a row of bins. Rainwater ran down a drain pipe beside them. The smell of wet concrete and cigarette ash hung in the air. I got your email, Priya said to Marcus, about municipal drainage schematics in diagnostic frames. You didn't reply. I tried. My email bounced internally. Then my calendar was wiped for the afternoon, and I was called into a meeting that didn't exist. Marcus felt Ellis shift beside him. Priya continued, voice low. So I checked the infrastructure liaison archive from a terminal not tied to my usual account. Marcus, there is no legitimate reason for those schematics to be in broadcast diagnostics, but there is an old emergency planning bundle linked to the tower. Flood routes, civil defense era tunnel references, utility overlays. Most of it should be read only. Should be, Marcus said. She nodded grimly. Someone accessed it repeatedly over the last 6 months. Who? Ellis asked. Priya looked at Marcus. Officially? Marcus did. The rain seemed to grow louder. Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Of course. But the access pattern is wrong, Priya said quickly. Too fast, too regular. Queries running when you were logged into live compliance elsewhere. I pulled a local audit fragment before it disappeared. She reached into her coat and handed Ellis a folded printout protected in a plastic sleeve. I don't know what this is, she said, but I know Marcus didn't do all of it. Ellis examined the page, then slipped it into his coat. That helps. Priya looked toward the building. There's more. Emergency routing is scheduled for a maintenance test tonight. Marcus stared at her. No, it isn't. It appeared on the engineering board 20 minutes ago. Backdated approval. Supposedly routine. Who approved it? Priya's mouth tightened. Martin Kell. For a moment, Marcus felt something like grief. He had not wanted Martin to be involved. It would have been easier to hate a stranger in a hooded jacket, easier to fear a faceless syndicate. Martin was irritable, dismissive, bureaucratic, and sometimes cruel in the casual way tired managers could be. But Marcus had believed him ordinary. Perhaps he was. Perhaps ordinary was enough. Is Martin inside? Ellis asked. Priya nodded. Control floor, with an external contractor I don't recognize. The hooded man? Marcus asked. I didn't see his face. Marcus turned toward the building. Every lighted window now seemed part of a machine already in motion. We need the routing console, he said. Priya shook her head. Security won't let you in. Your badge is suspended. Ellis stepped forward. Mine isn't. They entered through reception under the authority of a police inquiry into unauthorized access connected to a stolen vehicle and potential commercial burglary. The young guard from the previous night was not there. An older guard with graying hair checked Ellis's warrant card, made a call, received an instruction that visibly irritated him, and allowed them through after signing them in. Marcus walked behind Ellis and Priya wearing a visitor badge in his own workplace. The humiliation no longer mattered. The building felt wrong immediately. Not empty, not alarmed. Wrong in a subtler way. Too many doors closed, too few voices. The usual low-level bustle of evening staff had thinned. In the lift, Priya stood rigid, arms folded, staring at the floor numbers. Ellis watched the mirrored walls. Marcus watched the emergency stop button and remembered counting floor lights during bad months years ago, as if numbers could keep disaster in sequence. Control Suite 3 was dark when they passed it. Dark, but not empty. Someone had turned the monitors off except for one central screen displaying a maintenance slate. Marcus stopped. The slate was wrong. It carried the company logo and standard color bars, but the lower left corner contained a tiny block of grey noise that pulsed once every few seconds. A ghost frame waiting inside the test signal. They've already staged it, Marcus whispered. Priya went pale. Ellis reached for his radio. Before he could speak, the corridor door at the far end opened. Martin Kell stepped out. He looked first at Marcus, then at Priya, then at Ellis. For one brief second, surprise crossed his face. Then it vanished under weary resignation. You shouldn't have come back, Martin said. Ellis moved between him and Marcus. Martin Kell? Martin ignored him. His eyes stayed on Marcus. You think this is about maps, he said. It isn't. It's about who gets blamed when the maps are found. Marcus felt the sentence slide into place too late. You used my account. Martin's jaw tightened. I protected the station. From what? From you at first. His voice cracked slightly on the last word, just enough to reveal fear underneath. Then from them. Then there wasn't a difference they cared about. Ellis took a step forward. Who is inside with you? Martin looked toward the emergency routing room. The corridor lights flickered. From behind the closed routing room door came the faint sound of a system tone beginning to rise. Not an alarm. A synchronization burst. Priya whispered, "The test is live." Marcus moved before anyone told him not to. He pushed past Martin, past Ellis's outstretched arm, and ran toward the routing room door just as the maintenance slate on the monitor dissolved into static. For a fraction of a second, inside that static, he saw the final frame. Not a map of tunnels. A map of blame. His own name sat at the center of it. The routing room door was locked. Marcus hit it with his shoulder before he had time to think, and pain flashed down his arm with such clean brightness that for half a second the corridor disappeared. The door did not move. It was reinforced, fire-rated, sealed around the edges, built to protect the one room in the center where a person could interrupt, redirect, or corrupt what the public saw. Behind him, Ellis shouted his name. Priya was already at the wall panel, trying her staff card against the emergency access reader. Red light, red light, red light. Martin stood several steps away, not running, not helping, his face emptied by a kind of exhausted surrender. Inside the routing room, the system tone rose. It was not loud, that made it worse. It began as a clean, narrow sound, nearly beyond hearing, then layered itself with a second tone beneath it. Then a third, the frequencies folding together like something mechanical pretending to breathe. On the monitor in Control Suite 3, visible through the glass wall down the corridor, the maintenance slate had broken into grey snow. Within that snow, the final frame pulsed. Marcus saw pieces of it each time the static stabilized. His name, his staff number, his credentials. A route map drawn through company systems, emergency routing logs, archive access points, local captures, unauthorized exports. It was not a tunnel map at all. It was an evidentiary map. A reconstruction of guilt prepared in advance, assembled from real actions, forged approvals, duplicate sessions, and just enough of Marcus's genuine investigation to make the false version breathe. The final frame was not for the syndicate below. It was for the aftermath. If the operation succeeded, the frame would vanish into the noise. If the operation failed, the frame would explain who had done it. Marcus Thorne, unstable compliance monitor, had manipulated broadcast systems, accessed historic infrastructure overlays, interfered with emergency routing, and guided accomplices through subterranean routes beneath Leeds. The city would not need to believe in ghost frames. It would only need to believe in him. Priya struck the access panel with the heel of her hand. My clearance has been revoked. Ellis pulled Martin by the arm. Open it. Martin did not resist. He looked at the door, then at Marcus, and for the first time there was no managerial irritation left in him, only fear. I can't, Martin said. Ellis pushed him against the wall hard enough to make the plastic signage rattle. Open the door. I don't have control anymore. Who does? Martin swallowed. From inside the routing room came the soft clack of a keyboard. Then another. Someone was working calmly while the three of them stood outside like people arriving late to a disaster designed around their delay. Marcus stepped close to Martin. Who is in there? Martin's eyes were wet now, though whether from fear, shame, or exhaustion, Marcus could not tell. I don't know his real name, he said. He came through contractors, systems assurance, temporary audit support. He had access papers from upstairs. Everything looked clean. That isn't enough to give him routing access. No, Martin whispered. It wasn't. Priya looked at him with disgust. What did you do? Martin's mouth opened, closed, opened again. They had my son. The corridor seemed to drop into silence except for the rising tone behind the door. Ellis loosened his grip by a fraction, but did not release him. Martin spoke quickly now, as if the confession had been waiting behind his teeth, and once opened could not stop. Not kidnapped, not like that. Debt, photos, men outside his flat. He's 22, he's stupid, he owed people money, and they made sure I knew they could reach him. They told me all I had to do was keep Marcus contained, change a rota, delay an incident, flag welfare, let the contractor run an audit test. I didn't know about banks or tunnels or... Daniel Vale, Marcus asked. Martin flinched. You knew about Daniel. I knew he'd made claims years ago. You helped bury them. I was told the matter was closed. Marcus stared at him. The old rage rose, but it did not come as fire. It came as clarity. That sentence has ruined a lot of people, he said. The tone inside the routing room shifted. It became less like sound and more like pressure in the teeth. Priya turned toward Control Suite 3, where the static was beginning to resolve into a dense field of embedded data. It's transmitting, she said. Marcus looked through the glass. The final frame repeated inside the maintenance slate, not as a single frame intrusion now, but as a burst pattern, pulsing through the outgoing path. If receivers across the city were listening, they were not merely receiving a map. They were receiving a prepared record, a machine-readable accusation, A version of events that would live in cached devices, compromised logs, perhaps even in systems the police would later recover. A ghost story written in evidence. Ellis spoke into his radio, voice urgent. "We have active unauthorized transmission at the broadcast center. Need immediate technical containment. Routing room compromised. Also advise units at Merion Exchange and North Ridge. Operation may include planted evidence implicating station employee. Treat digital materials as potentially manipulated." A burst of radio chatter answered him, overlapping, indistinct. Then one phrase cut through. "Team at Merion reports movement below street level. Possible cutting equipment heard behind sealed access." Marcus turned. Ellis heard it too. Their eyes met. Below the city, the route team was still moving. Above it, the frame naming Marcus was still transmitting. The room between those two truths was locked. Priya stepped away from the access panel. "There's a manual isolation breaker in the old plant corridor." Marcus looked at her. "For routing?" "For power to the emergency rack, not the whole tower. It was left from the previous installation, officially decommissioned, but the physical line still feeds the bypass cabinet." "Would it kill the burst?" "It could." "Could it damage public alert routing?" Priya's face tightened. "Yes." "How badly?" Ellis asked. "If we cut it wrong, the system fails over unpredictably. We might interrupt regional broadcast, emergency alert standby, maybe trigger alarms across the network." Marcus absorbed this. The choice had finally stripped itself clean. There would be no perfect intervention, no authorized path arriving in time, no document persuasive enough to stop a signal already moving. Every option left damage behind. "Where?" he asked. Priya pointed down the corridor. "Lower plant, behind Archive B. But you need an engineering key." Martin lifted his trembling hand slowly. From his belt, beneath his jacket, hung a ring of keys. Ellis took it from him. The routing room door opened before anyone moved. It did not swing wide. It released with a soft magnetic click and opened only a few inches, enough for the sound inside to sharpen. Cold blue light spilled into the corridor. A man's voice came from within. "Marcus," it said, "you're still trying to interrupt the wrong thing." No one breathed. Ellis raised his baton and moved toward the door, but Marcus caught his sleeve. "Wait," the voice continued, calm, almost bored. "The police are already at North Ridge. They're almost at Merion. They will find men, tools, routes, devices, enough arrests for headlines, enough evidence for confidence, and then they will find you in the chain." Marcus recognized the voice, though he had never heard it without distortion. The voicemail whisper. The man in the routing room had been with him from the second frame onward. Ellis called through the gap. "Police, step away from the console and open the door fully." A quiet laugh. "Sergeant Ellis, you were faster than expected." Ellis stiffened. Marcus saw Priya's face drain of color. The man knew Ellis's name. Of course he did. The camera, the phones, the meeting. Every attempt to bring truth into the official world had been observed, shaped, absorbed. The door opened another few inches. Inside, Marcus could see part of the routing room. Equipment racks, status lights, the edge of a console, a hand resting beside a keyboard. The hand wore a contractor's access band. Calm fingers, clean nails, a wedding ring. Not a monster, a technician, a professional. That made him more frightening. "You can cut the rack power," the man said. "Priya is right. It may corrupt the burst. It may also wipe the logs that prove anyone else was here. It may trigger failover and make Marcus's override attempt look exactly like sabotage. Or you can leave it running and let the final frame complete cleanly. At least then the system remains intact." Martin made a small sound behind them. The contractor heard it. "Martin, go home. Your son is safe as long as you stop improvising." Ellis moved then. He kicked the door hard, forcing the opening wider, but the contractor had wedged something heavy behind it. The gap widened only enough for a shoulder, not enough to enter cleanly. The baton struck metal. Inside, a chair scraped back. Priya grabbed Marcus's arm. "Plant corridor, now!" They ran. Not heroically, awkwardly, down a fluorescent corridor slick with institutional polish, past locked cupboards and archive signs. past the room where Marcus had seen the hooded figure using his credentials. Behind them, Ellis shouted orders. The routing room door crashed again under impact. Martin called something Marcus could not make out. The stairs to the lower plant were narrow and concrete, lit by bare bulbs. Priya moved faster than Marcus expected, one hand on the rail, keys already sorted by touch. The air changed as they descended, becoming warmer, heavier, metallic. Machinery hummed below. Pipes clanged. The hidden body of the broadcast center revealed itself not as screens and procedures, but as heat, voltage, pressure, and dust. Archive B's corridor was darker than before. The room where the duplicate session had appeared stood open, its terminal dark. On the floor near the doorway lay a strip of black tape, a plastic badge holder, and a single muddy footprint drying at the edge. Marcus saw these details with terrible precision because his mind, under pressure, still loved evidence. Priya unlocked a grey service door marked Plant Access, authorized engineering only. Inside, the sound deepened, fans turned behind grills. Cable trays ran overhead, the air smelled of hot insulation. Along the far wall stood older electrical cabinets, some labeled clearly, others carrying faded stickers from previous contractors. Priya moved to a metal panel, partly obscured by a stacked pallet of obsolete equipment. "Help me," she said. Marcus pushed the pallet aside, pain flared in his shoulder again. Priya opened the panel with one of Martin's keys. Inside were heavy switches, old labels, and a laminated diagram cracked with age. She scanned it, lips moving silently. "Priya, I need to be sure. I need to be sure," she snapped. Marcus stopped. She was right. Panic dressed as urgency could kill as surely as hesitation. Priya traced the diagram with one finger, following the old feed line to a bypass cabinet labeled ER2AUX, then to a secondary notation someone had crossed out years earlier, but never physically removed. "That one," she said. A black-handled breaker sat behind a safety latch. Marcus reached for it. Priya caught his wrist. "If you pull this, they will say you did it." "They already are." No, her eyes were bright. "This makes it real." He knew what she meant. Until now, Marcus had been framed through false access, false logs, planted evidence. Pulling the breaker would be his own act. However necessary, however defensible, it would give the story a true center. Marcus Thorne did interfere with the broadcast chain. Some truths could still be used as lies. Above them, faint but unmistakable, the synchronization tone shifted again through the building's infrastructure. The final burst was nearing completion. Marcus thought of Daniel Vale raising his hands in the workshop. He thought of Alice asking whether he was safe from someone else or from himself. He thought of Ellis saying he was not bait. He thought of every screen in the city carrying things no one saw, every hidden receiver waiting for a pulse of certainty from a public signal. Then he pulled the breaker. The plant room snapped into partial darkness, fans wound down. A relay slammed somewhere behind the wall. A red alarm began flashing without sound, then found its voice in a harsh, intermittent beep. Above them, something heavy cut out and restarted, cycling into failover. For 2 seconds, there was no tone. Then the building erupted. Not physically, no explosion, no cinematic shower of sparks. The eruption was systemic. Alarms layered over one another, emergency lights came on. Somewhere upstairs, people shouted. A public address chime began and died halfway through. The old broadcast center, usually so controlled, entered a state of confusion its designers had tried to make impossible. Priya looked at the cabinet display. "Burst corrupted," she said. Marcus did not allow himself relief. "Is it stopped?" "For now." His legs weakened, and he placed one hand against the cabinet to steady himself. Then Ellis's voice came through the stairwell above, shouting for them. They ran back up. The corridor outside routing was chaos in the restrained language of a technical building. Staff had emerged from offices. A security alarm flashed near the lifts. Martin Kell sat on the floor against the wall, hands visible, guarded by an officer who must have entered during the confusion. Ellis stood at the routing room door with another officer beside him. The door was open. The contractor was gone. Inside, the console displayed a frozen error state. On the main routing monitor, the final frame remained visible, but broken. Its data field had torn into blocks. Marcus's name appeared in fragments, incomplete, repeated and corrupted, no longer forming the clean accusation intended for whichever systems had been meant to preserve it. Ellis turned to Marcus. Where did he go? Marcus looked past him into the room. There was a rear maintenance hatch open behind the equipment racks, of course. The building, like the city, had more roots than anyone admitted. Ellis cursed and spoke into his radio. Suspect fleeing through internal service access from routing room. Lockdown exits, check plant corridors, roof access, loading bay. A reply came almost immediately, breathless and loud. Sergeant, team at Merion has contact. 2 detained below street level. 1 injured, cutting equipment recovered. There's another group moving toward the river service line. Communications appear disrupted. They're disoriented. Marcus closed his eyes. The jammer had worked. Not cleanly, not completely, but enough. Another voice broke over the radio. Northridge basement, clear of civilians. Devices found near service door. Possible decoys. Then another. Requesting technical unit. Multiple receivers recovered, some still active. Ellis looked at Marcus, and for a single moment the terrible machinery of doubt stopped moving. The truth had surfaced. Not all of it. Not enough to save everyone. Not enough to erase what had been done in Marcus's name. But enough to change the direction of authority. Enough to make the police run toward the tunnels instead of toward his mind. Then Priya, standing beside Control Suite 3, made a sound. Small. Not fear exactly. Recognition. Marcus turned. The central monitor in the dark suite had come back on. The maintenance slate was gone. In its place, a camera feed showed a narrow underground passage, brick walls wet under harsh torchlight. Officers moved through the frame, blurred and urgent. One man knelt beside a receiver device mounted to a pipe. At first, Marcus thought it was a police feed. Then he saw the caption at the bottom. Not an official timestamp. A message. You corrupted the frame. The image flickered. A second line appeared, but not the source. The feed cut to static, and inside that static, for one final fraction of a second, Marcus saw Daniel Vale's face. For several seconds, no one in Control Suite 3 spoke. The monitor had gone back to ordinary static, then to black, then to a system recovery screen that looked almost indecent in its calmness. A blue progress bar crawled along the bottom edge. Diagnostic text appeared in neat white lines. Emergency routing reset, signal integrity check pending, archive recovery in progress. It was the language of machines after violence. Marcus stood in the doorway with his hand still braced against the frame, staring at the place where Daniel Vale's face had appeared. It had been less than a second, perhaps less than a frame, a pale face in underground darkness, eyes open, mouth half turned as if he had been trying to speak when the image caught him. There had been no sound. No location marker, no proof that the picture was live, but Marcus had seen him, so had Priya, so had Sergeant Ellis. That mattered. It did not save Daniel. It did not explain the source, but it meant the site no longer belonged to Marcus alone. Ellis lowered his radio slowly. He had been receiving updates from the city center for several minutes. Arrests below Merion Exchange, devices recovered near Northridge. A sealed route breached under an old service corridor. One suspect injured by a fall, another taken near a river access point after losing signal guidance. The corrupted burst had not ended the operation like a switch turning off a light. Real life rarely granted such clean endings, but it had broken the coordination. It had turned timing into confusion. It had made men underground hesitate where hesitation mattered. That had been enough. At 1942, police units entered the broadcast center in force. Not with the drama Marcus had once imagined. No storming line of armed officers. No cinematic shouting through smoke. They came in with warrant cards, evidence bags, technical specialists, and the grave impatience of people who had realized too late that a quiet building had become a crime scene. Staff were moved into meeting rooms. Systems were isolated. Workstations were photographed before being touched. The routing room was sealed. Archive Terminal B was taped off. Martin Kell was taken aside by 2 officers and did not look at Marcus as he passed. Marcus expected to feel triumph when that happened. Instead, he felt the flat exhaustion of a man watching a wall collapse and discovering that the view behind it was only more weather. The contractor in the routing room was not found inside the building. A rear maintenance hatch led into a service crawl space above the old cable riser, then to a disused loading duct that opened near a fenced equipment yard. A camera there had failed 3 minutes before the breaker was pulled. Later, a police dog followed a scent to the edge of the industrial estate, where it vanished near a bus stop and a row of parked vans. The hooded figure from Archive Terminal B was never formally identified that night, nor was the whispered caller, nor was the person who had sent the live images to the old digital camera. The men arrested beneath the city carried tools, compact receivers, laminated route cards, encrypted radios, and false identification linked to subcontractor firms. None carried a master plan. None admitted knowing who had built the ghost frame system. Some claimed they believed they were moving stolen goods through abandoned routes. Some said nothing. One, bleeding from a cut above his eye, kept repeating that the signal had lied. That phrase would remain with Marcus longer than any official statement. The signal had lied. By midnight, the story had already begun dividing into safer versions. A suspected organized burglary disrupted below Leeds city centre. Several arrests following a police operation near a secure storage facility. Technical irregularities under investigation at a regional broadcast site. No threat to the wider public. No evidence of ongoing danger. The sentences were not false. That was the problem. They were true in the way a locked door is true. They described the surface and asked the public not to worry about the rooms behind it. Marcus gave his first formal statement at IRA 110 in a temporary interview room at the broadcast centre. Seated across from Sergeant Ellis and a detective whose name he forgot almost immediately after hearing it. His shoulder ached where he had hit the routing room door. His hands were still marked with cuts from Daniel's passage. Someone had given him tea in a paper cup, but he had not touched it. He told the story carefully. He said when he had seen the first ghost frame. He described the Holbeck map, the warning from the printer, the vanished files, the duplicate sessions, the photograph at his flat, Daniel Vale's workshop, the hard drive, Northridge, Albion, Merion Exchange, the breaker, the corrupted final frame. When he did not know, he said he did not know. When he inferred, he named it as inference. When his memory blurred, he stopped and corrected himself. The detective listened with the expression of a person who would rather the world be less strange. Ellis listened like a man who had already accepted that strangeness, when properly documented, could become evidence. At 0236, Alice arrived. She had driven from York after leaving the children with a neighbour and arguing with her husband, only long enough to prove she was too frightened to argue properly. She found Marcus in a corridor outside the interview room, wrapped in a foil blanket someone had given him, though he was not cold. For a moment, they only looked at each other. Then she crossed the corridor and hugged him with a force that made his injured shoulder burn. He did not pull away. "I didn't know what to believe," she whispered. "I didn't either," Marcus said. That was the truest thing he had said all night. In the days that followed, belief became official in stages. The recovered receivers proved that hidden signal bursts had been captured through modified devices placed in shops, storage rooms, service cupboards, and vacant units across the city. The stolen van at Northridge was real. The obsolete access code was real. The equipment beneath Merion Exchange was real. The false audit entries under Marcus's credentials were real. Priya's audit fragment helped establish that his account had been used while he was physically elsewhere. Daniel's hard drive contained enough verified cross-references to transform ghost frames from an impossible claim into a technical method under investigation. It did not make the whole truth simple. The deeper authorities looked, the more the case resisted a single shape. The syndicate was not one organization with a dramatic name. It was a mesh of criminals, contractors, compromised insiders, old favors, debts, and technical knowledge scattered across people who sometimes understood only their own small part. Some routes beneath the city had been used before. Some devices had been in place for months, others for years. And Daniel Vale had been right about one thing above all others. The invisible systems worked because no one looked at them together. Broadcast faults belonged to engineers. Tunnels belonged to utilities. Vans belonged to police. Vaults belonged to private security. Mental health concerns belonged to welfare. Each part had a department. Each department had a procedure. Between those procedures, something had learned to move. Daniel was found 3 days later, alive, barely. A railway maintenance crew discovered him in a locked service chamber near an old drainage route west of the city centre. He was dehydrated, concussed and hypothermic, with bruising along one side of his face and wrists, marked from restraints. He remembered being taken from Unit 6. He remembered voices. He remembered being told that if Marcus followed the wrong map, everyone would believe the right lie. After that, his memory broke into fragments of darkness, movement, and the sound of water behind brick. When Marcus visited him in hospital, Daniel looked smaller beneath the white sheets. For a long time, the two men said nothing. The ward was bright in the merciless way hospitals are bright, with a television mounted high in the corner showing a daytime property program without sound. Sunlight came through the blinds in thin, pale bars. Somewhere nearby, a nurse laughed softly at something a patient had said. Daniel looked at the muted television. "Still hate the things," he murmured. Marcus sat beside the bed. "You were right." Daniel's mouth moved in what might have been a smile. "No one is ever completely right in this kind of mess. You saw it first, and lost almost everything looking at it." Marcus did not know how to answer. Daniel turned his head toward him. "Don't make a religion out of being believed. It's just another room you can get trapped in." The words stayed with Marcus because they were not comforting. Comfort would have been easier. Daniel offered something harder, a warning against turning vindication into identity. A month later, Marcus was dismissed from the broadcast center. The letter was written in careful language. Serious breach of protocol, unauthorized interference with emergency routing infrastructure, failure to follow escalation procedure, mitigating circumstances acknowledged, ongoing criminal investigation noted, no admission of institutional liability. He read it twice at his kitchen table while rain tapped the window behind him. Priya resigned before the internal review concluded. Martin Kell was charged with several offences related to unauthorized access and obstruction, though his cooperation and the threats against his son complicated the case. Fiona Greaves gave evidence to a parliamentary committee on infrastructure security and used the phrase unprecedented cross-domain exploitation 17 times. Sergeant Ellis received no public medal, no dramatic recognition, only more paperwork and the quiet knowledge that, on one wet afternoon in a library, he had chosen to look before categorizing. The public story faded within weeks. It was too strange to remain headline news and too technical to become legend. For a few days, commentators argued about broadcast security. Local papers ran diagrams of tunnels beneath Leeds. Online forums filled with theories, most of them wrong, some of them uncomfortably close. Then another scandal arrived, another storm, another election row, another celebrity trial. The city moved on because cities must. Marcus did not move on as neatly. He stopped working nights, not by choice at first, then by decision. He attended therapy more often. He learned to say, without flinching, that something real had happened, and that his fear had also been real, and that one truth did not cancel the other. Some mornings, he still woke convinced he had heard a printer start in the kitchen. Some evenings, he saw static on a shop television and felt his body prepare for danger before his mind had time to intervene. Recovery did not erase the ghost frame. It taught him how not to become one. Months later, after the first hearings and before the trials, Marcus returned to the industrial estate outside Leeds. He stood across the road from the broadcast centre, hands in his coat pockets, watching the mast blink red against a darkening sky. The building looked exactly as it always had. Concrete, steel fencing, narrow windows, security lights, ordinary, useful, unforgiving. He thought of all the signals passing through the air around him. News, weather, advertisements, old films, public alerts, football results, voices, music, silence, static. Most of it harmless, most of it mundane, most of it carrying only what it claimed to carry. Most. That was the word that remained, because the investigation never found the source that had sent Daniel's face through the static after the final burst. It never found the full architecture of the ghost frame network. It never proved who first understood that a city could be mapped not only through its streets and sewers, but through the habits of people who trusted screens to tell them when nothing was there. And sometimes late at night in flats and hotel rooms and care homes and empty offices across the country, a television still flickers for less than a second. The viewer blinks, the program continues, and no one can say with complete certainty what passed through the frame. If this story stayed with you, subscribe to the channel, share your thoughts in the comments, and pass the video on to someone who still believes the smallest glitches are always meaningless.